Wow, wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in live here. Appreciate everybody in the chat and anybody that tuned in later on. We're going to do a little review today of our historical investigations into the so-called Black Irish. Yeah, don't worry about what happened earlier. We're going to put that on Patreon, and I kind of figured it was about to happen, and yeah, we're going to move on. And shout out to all my new subscribers. Thank you for taking the time to watch the videos, subscribing, and hope you guys enjoyed this one, especially to the new people. All right, the so-called Black Irish. All right, more than a myth. This is history, and it's not about just mixing with Africans or just talking about eye complexion or hair color. I know there's a lot of controversy. I get a lot of negative feedback where a lot of people get upset when we start talking about this. We're not excluding you, we're just including a certain history that was left out. All right, so we're gonna just continue. All right, thanks for being here. I might do some side commentary here and there. Yeah, they can't stop the unstoppable. Wow.
There's a spot in me heart which no carrying me on. There's a depth in me soul never sounded unknown. There's a place in my memory, my life, that you feel. No one ever take it, no one ever will. Sure, I love the dear silver that shines in your hair, and the brow that's all furrowed and wrinkled with care. I kiss the dear fingers so toil-worn for me. Oh, God bless you and keep you, Mother McCree.
Stuff. All right, now I'm reading from this book. It's called The Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, 2nd Series, Volume 2, Light Literature and Antiques, Dublin. This is published from the years 1879-1888. It says here, I'm on page 47 of this book. Bring you right here. It says, now at two primitive Irish races, which he designates as Firbolg and Celt. He has given typical figures. One of these, the Firbolg cranium, will in all probability correspond with the remarkable dolichocephalic skull that I have described. These long-headed, black-visaged, dark-haired, swarthy aboriginals, swarthy, black-haired, black-visaged, swarthy aboriginals possess skulls that are principally characterized by their extreme length from before, backwards, or what is technically termed the antero-posterior diameter, and the flatness of their sides. All right, again, swarthy aboriginals. He says, in addition, now we find similar conditions of head still existent among the modern inhabitants of this country, particularly beyond the Shannon, where the darker Firbolg race, even a darker race than these swarthy aboriginals, may still be traced as distinct from the more globular-headed, light-eyed, fair-haired Celtic people who lived to the northeast of that river. I'm on page 53 of this book now, and I go down here to this paragraph, and it says, the most probable explanation appears to be that it was the result of one of those piratical descents or invasions of the Irish coast made by robber Vikings, Danars, or Black Danes. Black Danes, again, Black Dane, Danish, Black Norsemen, Black Vikings, Black Danes, Black Vikings, the 6 kings, Vikings VI, 6 kings, the 6 Danish kings, Danites, and their ferocious allies from the islands of Scotland, which were so common in the 9th and 10th centuries. These invasions took place subsequent to and were altogether different from the Scandinavian settlements in Ireland of Lachlan's or Azure Gentiles, who are described in the chronicles of the time by their distinctive feature of being a white or fair-haired race. All right, so different from the Black Danes.
All right, and what does it say here? Family names from the Irish, Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Norman, and Scotch, considered in relations to their etymology, with brief remarks of the history and languages, peoples to whom we are indebted for their origin, by Thomas G. Gentry. This is from 1892. Now it says here, Dever, originally Duber, from Dub, which means black. Dub, black. Like Dublin, the city of Dublin is the city of black. Dub, man, a dark complexioned man. Dubur, dub, a dark complexioned man. So dub, Duffy. Duffy is also like dub, pronounced dub or dupe or black. Dub, black, an individual, a black person, a black dub. All right. Dougal or Douglas, right? Douglas, right? Douglas from black, dark, glass, green, gray, dark green, dark gray. Dougal. So Douglas means black too. Douglas. Dougal from dub, black, gal, stranger, a black stranger. Dougal from the same roots.
All right, this is the book, The Scottish Nation, or the Surnames, Families, Literature, Honors, and Biographical History of the People of Scotland by William Anderson. This is volume 2, 1863. I'm on page 71 of this book, and it says here, Duff, a surname adopted from the Celtic, in which language the word means black. All right, Duff means black. Sebald, in his History of Fife, says that as Niger and Rufus were names of families amongst the Romans, from the color and complexion of men, so it seems Duff was from the swarthy and black color of those of the tribe or clan of Macduff. All right, swarthy, black, tribes, Macduff. It is the family name of the Earl of Fife in the peerage of Ireland, okay? Ireland, descended from the Duncan Macduff, Thane of Fife, who overthrew Macbeth and gave such effectual aid to Malcolm Canmore in obtaining possession of the throne.
This is the crest of Great Britain and Ireland, Dominion of Canada, India, and Australasia. Derived from best authorities and family records. All right, this is an official, the Fairbairns crest, family crest. All right, collection. This is one of them right here. These ain't slaves. These are family crest. You know. And this is a close-up of number 7. Again, this is what it looks like. Again, this is the Royal Book of Crests of Great Britain and Ireland, Dominion of Canada, India, and Australasia, derived from the best authorities and family records by James Fairbairn. All right, 1883. You hear Riddles of Prehistoric Times by James H. Anderson. All right, Riddles of Prehistoric Time, J.H. Anderson. The Iberians in ancient times inhabited the western and southern part of Europe, the northern part of Africa, in fact, all parts reached from the Mediterranean Sea, the Basque in Spain and France, the little dark Welshmen, the Scotch and black Celts to the west of the Shannon River in Ireland, as well as the same kind of men in Brittany and Aquitaine in France. The Guanches of the Canary Islands and the Berbers in Africa are all probably the remnants of the race. Right? So he's grouping all these people to the same people.
A lot of you've seen his books, you know, The Negro Question, and there's like about 6, 7, 8 parts by Lee Cummins. Now, this is the basically the introduction of the book. It says that this book has been designed to shed light on the missing link between the two sciences, history and genetics. We have been trained to trust without question what we are taught in the academia, absolutism of these United States. Now a new science has emerged that has produced results that are in direct conflict with the history that is being taught in the classrooms, all right? That science is genetics. But what is this issue? The pebble in the shoe that is putting genetics against history. The world history that is being taught in the classrooms omit the existence of the Black Scots, Black Irish, Black Brits, Black Italians, Black French, or Black Europeans that were sold directly into the American slave plantations. Again, what have I been saying? Who was really coming in over here in ships by the thousands and thousands and thousands? That was Europeans.
Oliver Cromwell in Ireland. All right, so pay attention to this. It says Oliver Cromwell was Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Ireland, and Scotland after the assassination of the Scottish English King Charles I. Upon taking military command of the Commonwealth, he invaded Ireland. And history states that he committed genocide in Ireland. All right, this is facts. This is history. And he did this to people of color, thousands of them, against the black population, so-called black population, Black Irish. The Black Irish that he didn't kill, he sold into the slave trade. The what? The slave trade, the real Middle Passage. This is what we've been learning recently, right? Right? If anybody foreign came, it wasn't mainly Africans. It was actually European indentured servants. They were sending convicts, undesirables. Remember, we've already gone through the primary sources, and we're going to continue. I'm going to show you way more of this proof. In 1641, Cromwell had 300,000 Black Irish. Again, 300,000 Black Irish sold into the North Atlantic slave trade, and in 1650, he had 100,000 Irish Scottish children sold into the Barbados. This is history. We've gone over this. Now, this is the family Gilbert crest, as he's saying, Irish coat of arms. All right, get a little close up, you see? This is the Gilberts from Ireland. You can look this up. It says this is an image of Black Irish coat of arms from the Gilbert family. 3 of the Gilberts related to this coat of arms have been traced to Barbados. Thomas Gilbert, Barbados 1635, all right? Do the genealogy, do the research, follow up if you want to prove it. Francis Gilbert, Virginia, 1736, and Robert Gilbert, Barbados, 1678. He's letting you know these are Black Irish, these people that landed in Barbados. The timeline fits with the eyewitness accounts of the Irish being shipped into the slave trade, but I have greater witness than this, he says. It says here on page 32, North Atlantic Slave Trade, Rod Hart Report, 1976. I look it up. The Black Irish that came into Jamaica had 2 places of origin, either Ireland or Barbados. Close to 300,000, all right? 300,000 Black Irish came directly from Ireland, and the rest came from Barbados. 70% of all black slaves on the island of Barbados came from Ireland. Again, 70% of all black slaves on the island of Barbados came from Ireland. In the 1925 census of Jamaica, there were 916,000 people on the island, and only 2% were white. And that's what I've been trying to tell you. Now, let's be logical. If we know there's not Africans coming over here, right? But they are bringing hundreds of thousands of Europeans as indentured servants over to the sugar plantations. Where are they today? Where's their descendants? Shouldn't it be more light or pale, the population? This is what he's trying to tell you. Let's be logical. In 1925, there was 916,000 people on the island, and only 2% were white. And that's because the aboriginals were so-called Negro, and most of these Europeans that were being sent over there were Black Europeans. All right. Now, this includes Marcus Garvey's family. They're Irish. You understand why he was saying go back to Africa? He ain't even from here. Now, we're going to get into all that stuff. So this oversight on the part of the world's historians to include these black Europeans in the North Atlantic slave discussion went unnoticed for the past 400 years. The invention of genetics plus the record of the eyewitnesses, he's talking about primary sources, which we have read. People from those times telling you, just like Abraham Lincoln, right? Video, people that knew him telling you he's dark, swarthy. All right, these are eyewitness accounts. They cannot be disputed. All right, this is the key to discovering the missing link between history and genetics. The Black Earl of Ireland, I guess, next. All right, here we got the image of Earl Gilbert the Gilbert, or the Black Earls of Ireland. Right, this is in a window glass, maybe in a building or church. All right, so you can see from 1141, Ireland. All right, this image says image location book of Tewkesbury Abbey and Wikipedia Encyclopedia. So the image of Gilbert, the Earl of Clare, Hereford, Ireland, can currently be found in the St. Mary the Virgin Church and Tewkesbury in the English county of Gloucestershire. Not only is this black Irish Earl being depicted as a black man, but his coat of arms depicts him as a black man. We got this other image of coat of arms. It's the first Earl of Annesley in Ireland. It says here, let me just zoom out. With Annesley coat of arms and signature image, location Chichester monuments. Remember the Chin, all this family in England, Chins, Ireland. This is an image of Lord Belmont, of the first Earl of Annesley in Northern Ireland. The Annesley family coat of arms is to the left of Lord Belmont's image. The coat of arms and the image of the Earl speak for themselves. It is becoming apparent that the last names of the black nobility of Europe have been assumed by the conquering English.
So I'm in this website. It's called accessible.archives.com. All right, and it has an article here. Just wanted to read. Found it very interesting. It says Irish indentured servants in the colonies. It says our 18th century newspaper collection includes the Pennsylvania Gazette and the South Carolina Gazette. Both newspapers carried many advertisements for the sale of indentured contracts and the recovery of runaway servants. All right, not just slave servants, indentured contracts. All right, so we're going to read some newspaper clips, and you can verify these again from the Pennsylvania Gazette and the South Carolina Gazette in the years they specify. All right, here it goes. Indentures for sale. All right, for sale. August 19, 1762, to be sold, an Irish woman servant who has 3 years and 3 months to serve. Inquire at the new printing office. All right, so she has 3 years left in her term, in her service. All right, so this person is selling his servant just like property. All right, just like chattel, just like property. He got, here, you want 3 more years before it's over? I'm done with her. And now we got October 29, 1766, to be disposed of 2 Irish servant boys, times the one having 6, the other 7 years to serve. Wow, so full contract still, 7 years to go, and are suitable either for town or country business. You can put them to do anything you want. Tobacco field, cotton field, or whatever you want to use them for. The above servants' times are disposed of for no fault, but only for want of employment. For further particulars, inquire to William Parr. All right, so this is August 10, 1738. Just arrived from Dublin in the snow, Jolly Bacchus, Peter Cullen, commander, a parcel, likely English and Irish servants, tradesmen, shoemakers, tailors, weavers, black and white smiths, carpenters, husbandmen, sundry other tradesmen, also a parcel of likely servant women, fit for either town or country work, whose times are to be disposed of by Thomas Walker, Butcher, or Samuel Walker, or John Dumont, or the said master on board. The 8th snow, now lying off against Market Street Wharf, where all due attendance will be given. Philadelphia, all right? So you see how they were just selling people, servants, just like property. We're going to get to something very interesting. Let's keep reading some of these. It says May 25th, 1734, says to be sold by Ripton Hutchinson, was selling on the bay extraordinary good butter and firkins, herrings, cheese, Irish potatoes, men's and women's servants. So he wasn't just selling his servants, he was also selling, cheese, Irish potatoes. So he was including these people, like just like the potatoes property, just selling it like chattel, right? Irish linens or several sorts and good Barbados rum. All right. So his display included humans, terraces and barrels. The source is the South Carolina Gazette from May 25th, 1734. It says May 13th, 1766, to be sold for no fault an Irish indented servant maid who is an excellent seamstress and has upwards of 4 years to serve. All right, she still got 4 years to serve. All right, now check this out. We're gonna get into some interesting things here. All right, this is the main reason I wanted to show you guys this. So it says August 16th, 1750. A runaway on the 12th instant from Joseph Jackson of London Grove, Chester County, an Irish servant man named William Farrell of middle stature and brown complexion. Brown complexion. Who? An Irish servant. We're talking about an Irish servant. He's not white. He's not pale. He's brown complexion. Aren't you brown complexion? So is this a white person or a so-called Negro? Anything would be up to conjecture, but we have a description of him clearly stating and describing him as brown complexion. All right? Had on when he went away, stripped flannel jacket, a brown sailor's jacket, a pair of coarse trousers, stripped drawers, a felt hat, and checkered shirt. His hair cut off. Likewise, all right, so it's going to say that he also ran away with somebody else. So it says, likewise, ran away with the aforesaid servant, an Irish servant, another Irish servant named Thomas Collard, all right, belonging to Samuel Ramsay of Londonderry. Samuel Ramsay, so that was his servant, in the said county of a dark complexion. Of a dark complexion. So this Irish servant man, this other runaway, Thomas Collard, is of dark complexion. So his boy, Joseph, let me see, what's his name? William Farrell, who is brown complexion, ran away, right? With him, another English servant or Irish servant, sorry. And he's also of dark complexion. They're both colored people. So what are you going to take from dark complexion? I know you're going to say, well, oh, black means white, Kurimeo. All right, well, right here it says dark. It doesn't say black. I mean, yeah, black. It says dark complexion. What is dark complexion? All right, this is an Irish servant. These are the Negro Irish is what I'm trying to explain to you. They were sending also Irish Negroes, so-called Negroes, dark people of color, Irish people of color, indigenous people from Ireland over here. They were sending them over here too, along with the white people. Dark complexion. This is from 1750. It says, and his pock-marked, had on a green double-breasted jacket with clear buttons and red linen, black breeches, black wig. His other clothes not certainly known. Whoever takes up and secures the said servants, so that their masters may have them again, shall have £6 rewards for both, or £3 for either. All right, so you'll get paid by Joseph Jackson or Samuel Ramsay. Now, are these so-called Negroes? That's the other thing I want you guys to understand. We have to research all of that. Just because we think in their owners, slave owners, don't mean they're white. It's called Phases of Irish History by Eoin MacNeill, professor of ancient Irish history in the National University of Ireland from 1920. Page 62, Pre-Celtic Inhabitants of Ireland, says, so far as the Iberian theory is not mere vacuum filling, it appears to rest on a single passage of Tacitus. He is describing the Silures, a British people whose territory was in the south of Wales, and who offered a very fierce resistance to the Romans. The swarthy complexion of the Silures, again, the swarthy complexion of the Silures, he says, the prevalence of curly hair among them, and their position over against Spain argue that the ancient Iberians must have crossed over from Spain and occupied the territory. We have often heard the occurrence of similar physical traits in the west of Ireland ascribed to a more recent Spanish mixture. In 1851, a new variety of Norsemen arrives on the Irish coast. They are called the Black Heathens, the Black Foreigners, the Black Lochlannocks, in contradiction to the Fair Heathens, Fair Foreigners, or Fair Lochlannocks, who had been here before them. The Welsh chronicle, the Annals Cambria, makes it fairly clear that these Black Heathens were the Danes, They came in hostility to the Norwegians, with whom they fought fierce battles, and we have already seen that for a number of years the Danes held the chief power in the Hebrides.
All right, and this is the Journal of the Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, volume 17 from 1888. Long before the Roman conquest, the intrusive Aryan Celt had been intermarrying with the older inhabitants of the country, who doubtless belonged to more than one race, the result being that the so-called Celtic race is an amalgamation, all right, of races different physiologically but dominated by a common moral and intellectual character. The consequence of subjection for a long series of generations to the same conditions of life, it has become a commonplace of ethnology that the so-called Celtic race includes not only the fair-complexioned Aryan Celt, but also the black Celt or Iberian with the dark skin, black hair and eyes and small limbs. The subject, however, is much more complex than this simple division would imply. We have seen that under the red Celt are included two distinct varieties. The black Celt is equally irreducible to the single type, or the fact that two types of red and black recur in the same family. My own, for example, not only indicates their long continued intermixture, but suggests the existence of intermediate varieties. It's called Plantation Production and White Proto-Slavery, White Indentured Servants, and the Colonization of English West Indies, 1624, 1645, all right? So indentured servants where? In the Caribbean, West Indies, plantation and production in white proto-slavery. And this is from the Americas volume 41, number 3, from January 1985. You can find this on pages 21 to 45, about 25 pages, published by the Cambridge University Press. So it says here, the effective colonization of these islands, and they're saying St. Christopher, which is St. Kitts, in 1624, Barbados, 1627, Nevis, 1628, Montserrat and Antigua in 1632 was possible. So these islands were possible because of early emergence of large plantations, which were clearly designed for large-scale production and the distribution of commodities upon the world market. They were instrumental in forging an effective and profitable agrarian culture out of the unstable frontier environment of the 17th century Caribbean. These plantations therefore preceded the emergence of the sugar industry and the general use of African slave labor. But again, they're letting you know in this article, right, that this indentured service, this preceded, all right, this was before these agrarian culture plantations, these plantations that preceded were before so-called Africans were coming, before, all right, their whole story. Kunta Kinte, right? They developed during the formative years when the production of tobacco, cotton, and indigo dominated land use and utilized predominantly European indentured labor. The structure of land distribution and the nature of land tenure systems in the pre-sugar era illustrate this. Most planters who accelerated the pace of economic growth in the late 1640s and early 1650s by the production of sugar and black slave labor, so-called black, that's the hijack. We already know indentured servitude continued up until the 1800s. Already owned substantial plantation stock with large numbers of indentured servants, right? So even before they keep trying to throw in those tags, African, black, they're letting you know the drop in between, that these were plantations were stocked with what? Large number of indentured servants, not Africans, stocked with indentured servants. Continuing in this article in part 2, it says the system of commodity production was built upon the labor of thousands of indentured servants imported from England, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. All right, these were the people that were supplying these Caribbean plantations, the early colonies with, and it was Europeans, again, not Africans. Unlike the Spanish settlements in the Greater Antilles, Barbados and the Leeward were not densely populated with Indians who could be reduced to chattel slavery. All right, so unlike, again, what are they letting you know here? Major drop right here. Like again, like I told you in my video, who the Spanish and Portuguese were really enslaving. Who were they really enslaving? When they're talking about all these so-called Negroes that the Spanish and the Portuguese were supposedly transporting everywhere in all their colonies, these were Indians. Like they're letting you know here, it's not like the Spanish settlements, right? Which they had what? A bunch of Indians to what? Enslave or put into chattel slavery, or right? The Aboriginals. They weren't talking about Africans there either, right?
A righteous and unruly lot, Irish,
Indentured servants and freemen in the English West Indies, 1644 to 1730 by Hilary McD Beckles. And this is from the William and Mary Quarterly, volume 47, number 4, October 1990. You can find this on pages 503 to 522, about 20 pages. All right, so continuing further down in the article, starts talking about the convicts and the political prisoners. So it says Barbados was the favorite West Indian dumping ground for political prisoners during the Commonwealth. On September 15, 1649, after the Battle of Drogheda, Oliver Cromwell informed John Bradshaw, president of the council, that the enemy were about 3,000. They made a stout resistance, but those who escaped with their lives are in safe custody for the Barbados. They're ready to be sent to the Barbados. In October 1655, he ordered that all English, Scots, and Irish prisoners in Dorchester jail be forthwith sent to Barbados. All right, convicts. In addition to political prisoners, many hundred of Irish were legally defined by the state as social undesirables and transported to the West Indies. So if they say, oh, they don't like you, or they see you look kind of funny, kind of poor, you're walking around like, he's an undesirable. I don't desire him. I don't desire that guy. So he got sent because I don't desire that guy. He got labeled not desirable, and he got transported to the West Indies to help meet the insatiable demand for sugar planters for labor. All right, we just got the other article about sugar plantations. Same thing, and again, not Africans. They're supplying these plantations with. Transporting such people had begun with the English court under the Charles I. Cromwell's regime carried out the practice on a far larger scale with the Irish. In 1654, for example, governors of several Irish counties received orders to arrest all wanderers, men and women, and such orders other Irish within their precincts as shall not prove they had such a settled course of industry as yielded them a means of their own to maintain them. All such children were in hospitals or workhouses, all prisoners, men and women, to be transported to the West Indies. You hear this? And you think all these people were pale-skinned? Why is the West Indies so dark complexion then? Wouldn't there be more descendants of these so-called white pale Europeans? Even though there is today, we do find like Irish descendants and all that, and we do know the story of Indentured, and we think it was just part of it, and just no. There were also colored people that looked just like people from Africa coming in, but they were Irish, they were Scott, they were German, and these people eventually were classified as Negro people.
Vast human cargo transported on tall British ships bound for the Americas. They were shipped by the hundreds of thousands and included men, women, and even the youngest of children. Whenever they rebelled or even disobeyed an order, they were punished in the harshest of ways. Slave owners would hang their human property by their hands and set their hands or feet on fire as one form of punishment. They were burned alive and had their heads placed on pikes in the marketplaces as warnings to other captives. Now, do we really need to go into all the gory details? We know all too well of the atrocities of the African slave trade. But are we talking about the African slave trade?
Nope.
King James II and Charles I also led a continued effort to enslave the Irish. Britain's famed Oliver Cromwell furthered this practice of dehumanizing one's next-door neighbor. The Irish slave trade began when James II sold 30,000 Irish prisoners as slaves to the New World. His proclamation of 1625 required Irish political prisoners to be sent overseas and sold to English settlers in the West Indies. By the mid-1600s, the Irish were the main slaves sold to Antigua and Montserrat. At that time, 70% of the total population of Montserrat were Irish slaves.
All right, you heard that? Irish slaves, so-called slave, Irish, not Africans. We're gonna get a little bit further on, a little documentary about Montserrat and its Irish culture, all right?
Ireland quickly became the biggest source of human livestock for English merchants. From 1641 to 1652, over 500,000 Irish were killed by the English, and another 300,000 were sold as slaves. Ireland's population fell from about 1.5 million to 600,000, just in one single decade. Families were ripped apart as the British did not allow Irish fathers to take their wives or children with them across the Atlantic. This led to a helpless population of homeless women and children. Britain's solution was to auction them off as well. During the 1650s, over 100,000 Irish children between the ages of 10 and 14 were taken from their parents and sold as slaves in the West Indies, Virginia, and New England. In this decade, 52,000 Irish, mostly women and children, were sold to Barbados and Virginia. Another 30,000 Irish men and women were also transported and sold to the highest bidder. In 1656, Cromwell ordered that 2,000 Irish children be taken to Jamaica and sold as slaves to English settlers. Many people today will avoid calling the Irish slaves what they truly were, slaves. They'll come up with terms like indentured servants. This is to describe what occurred to the Irish. However, in most cases, from the 17th and 18th centuries, Irish slaves were nothing more than human cattle. If a planter whipped or branded or beat an Irish slave to death, it was never a crime. A death was nothing more than a monetary setback. England continued to ship tens of thousands of Irish slaves for more than a century. Records state that after 1798, the Irish Rebellion, thousands of Irish slaves were sold to both America and Australia. One British ship even dumped 1,302 slaves into the Atlantic Ocean so that the crew could have plenty of food to eat.
For a relaxed, get-away-from-it-all holiday, visit Kinsale in the sunny southwest. Laze in a boat along its Atlantic shore, anchor at Fox's Bay, Roach's Bluff or Sweeney's Well, or just lounge in the shade of the tree-lined beaches. If you feel more energetic, you could always climb Fogarty's Hill or nearby Fergus Mountain. And for the really enterprising, there's a day trip up the Galway volcano. Or if you just want to take it easy, why not rent a holiday villa with its balcony looking west over the Atlantic? Yes, every taste is catered for in Holiday Kinsale.
Unfortunately, it's a bit far to take the wife and family. To be precise, 4,128 miles from Cork, give or take a few. It's on the Emerald Isle, all right, and they'll feel quite at home among its Atlantic beaches, green fields, harps and shamrocks. But the trouble is that this Kinsale is at the wrong side of the Atlantic. It's Kinsale in Montserrat, a West Indian island, the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, and home of a unique race of people, the Black Irish.
There's a spot in me heart which no color. There's a depth in me soul never sounded unknown. There's a place in my memory, my life, that you feel. No one ever take it, no one ever will. Sure, I love the dear silver that shines in your hair, and the brow that's all furrowed and wrinkled with care. I kiss the dear fingers so toil-worn for me. Oh, God bless you and keep you, Mother McCree.
There's much in Montserrat besides Mother McCree to remind Patrick Robert Riley of his ancestral home. Though now a British colony, evidence of Irish origins are as aggressive in Montserrat as in Boston or New York, and the harps and shamrocks are not just commercial emblems. The first 3 governors of Montserrat were Irish born, and the local police are proud of the Kathleen Ni Houlihan figure with harp and cross, which forms their coat of arms. So Montserrat makes quite a fuss of St. Patrick's Day, aided and abetted by Patrick Robert Riley.
Lately, it has become quite a big day. The radio stations seem to devote almost the whole day, to singing Irish songs, interviewing people about Irish customs and so on. And I usually have the honor of being called, because I usually go down to town dressed all in green on St. Patrick's Day. And, well, the folks actually look out and said, "Here comes Mr. St. Patrick's."
The title Emerald Isle of the Caribbean is given to Montserrat partly because of the lush green foliage of its countryside. The colour green is everywhere, on roofs, doors, notices and school uniforms. But there's a good deal more to the Irish connection than a mere identity of national colour. This is Standard 4 in the Infant Jesus preschool in Plymouth, Montserrat. The faces may not be terribly familiar to you, but I think some of the names will. Mrs. Catherine Ryan is the teacher. Mrs. Ryan, could I have a look at the list of names and see if I recognise some of them? There's Devon Riley, Sherilyn Ryan, Joanne Burke. Let's try some of the names. What's your name?
Eugene Fleming.
Eugene Fleming. Is that right?
Eugene Fleming.
Good man, Eugene. And what's yours?
Sean Castles.
Sean Castles. And what's yours?
Jerome Mead.
Jerome Mead. Is that it?
Yeah.
Good man. Now let's try some of the girls. What's your name?
John Burke.
What is it?
John Burke.
Joanne Burke. Is that right? Good girl, Joanne. And what's yours?
Michelle Castle.
Michelle Castles. And what's your name?
Irish.
What's your first name again?
Colin Irish.
Colleen. Is it? Colleen Irish. Is that your name?
Yeah.
Good girl, Colleen. And what's your name?
Michael Ryan.
Michael Ryan. Well done. And what's your name?
Miriam Carty.
Marianne Curty. Is that it? Good girl, Marianne. And what's your name?
Sandra Farrell.
Sandra Farrell. In fact, well over half the names of the 13,000 people who now inhabit the island of Montserrat are distinctively Irish. In parts of the island, the proportion of Irish names would be as high as 9 out of 10. Apart from the more familiar Irish names, you also get words like Irish, Dublin, Cork, even Kinsale used as surnames, which would seem to make the Montserrat children more Irish than the Irish themselves. The first Irish landed in Montserrat in 1632, at this bay, Kinsale Bay. The plantations just inland from here are still to this day known as Broderick's Estate, O'Gara's Estate and Galway Estate, and the little village just around that headland is St. Patrick's Village. Who were they, these first Irish settlers? Well, a group came out from Cork with names like Barry, Sullivan, Driscoll, Roach and Ryan, and they settled in the neighbouring island of St. Kitts,
hoping to trade in tobacco there. But after a few months they had such violent rows with the English Puritans in St. Kitts that they left there for the smaller island of Montserrat, and they hoped peace.
It was the feeling of despair after the Battle of Kinsale which drove these first settlers out of Ireland. The name Kinsale was obviously prominent in their minds as they gave it their first landing place in Montserrat. Andrew Power, who died in 1720 at the age of 56, may have been the son of one of those first adventurers who crossed the Atlantic to St. Kitts and thence to Montserrat.
A second group of Irish settlers arrived in Montserrat at about the same time as the St. Kitts evacuees, and they landed down there at Carr's Bay. They came from Virginia in America. Lord Baltimore was just crossing the Atlantic to organise his settlement of English Catholics in Maryland. He brought with him his chaplain, an English Jesuit, Father Andrew White. With typical Jesuitical industry, Father White kept a diary of the voyage. January 26, 1633. By noon we came before the island of Montserrat, wherein is a noble plantation of Irish Catholics, whom the Virginians would not suffer to live with them because of their religion. So 2 groups of Irish came to Montserrat from places over 1,000 miles apart, in each case as victims of religious persecution.
For almost 10 years, these 2 groups of Irish settlers found peace. The high mountainous ridge down the centre of Montserrat gave abundant water, and the warm, moist climate enabled them to farm almost as they had in Ireland. Cattle were exported from Galway to Montserrat and seemed to thrive when crossed with the local stock. But now the Irish were the masters, and like all other West Indian planters, they had their quota of African slaves. A census of Montserrat taken in the mid-17th century lists the population as Irish 2,000, English 700, Scots 52, African slaves 1,000. It's a widely held view in Montserrat today that the Irish landowners treated their slaves with more care and kindness than did the English and Scots. Dr. Howard Fergus, university lecturer in Plymouth, has just completed a history of the island. I asked him what brought about this change in the fortunes of the Irish in Montserrat.
I think that this had to do with their religion, which was Roman Catholicism. In fact, although the English in St. Kitts, which is just nearby, did make a treaty with the French in 1627 against their common enemy like the Spanish and the Caribs, the English never really trusted the French, and this was partly because of their religion. This is why, for instance, England occupied the center of St. Kitts while the French were at both ends. So when Montserrat became the asylum for Roman Catholics from Ireland and elsewhere next door, the English were again suspicious of the Irish and consequently of the people in Montserrat.
And why should this suspicion of the French transfer to the Irish?
Well, as you know, the French were essentially Catholics, and it was feared that, especially with events in England, happening in the Stuart period, that the Irish in Montserrat and the French Irish in St. Kitts could rise up. In other words, there could be a rebellion in Montserrat against the planter lords.
So suddenly and with relentless vigour, the tide began to run against the Irish Catholics of Montserrat. Twice the French conquered the island, but each time they were beaten off by the English. This left the Puritans in power. Anti-Catholic and afraid of another French-Irish alliance, they kept the Irish down. Attendance at Mass was forbidden. Catholic priests were denied entry. The Irish appealed to Rome for a priest, and in 1650 a Limerick Jesuit, Father John Stritch, volunteered to make the dangerous journey. He first travelled to St. Kitts, and after a few months set sail for Montserrat. There was little hope of his getting past the port authorities dressed as a Catholic priest, so Father Stritch disguised himself as a timber merchant. He set up camp, carrying on his timber business by day, and by word of mouth let the Irish know of his real identity. He risked imprisonment if caught, and so did all who came to receive the sacraments from him. He speaks of the joy of the Irish when they heard he had arrived. They came to mass at his hideout, travelling at night and using cliff paths.
A great number of the Irish immigrants were either indentured servants or prisoners. They arrived here at the wharf in Montserrat. The first of the indentured servants were only finishing their time of service when the sugar boom hit the West Indies. Montserrat planters turned to sugar and the price of land rocketed. There were no longer any small plots available for the freed indentured servants. The problem was added to by the fact that sugar is a labour-intensive crop and thousands of workers were required to harvest the cane. So the prisons of Ireland were emptied of anyone, political prisoner or criminal, who was strong enough to make the crossing of the Atlantic and harvest the sugar.
The courtroom in Plymouth has heard quite a few Irish names and still does even today.
Monday's Court, Noel Skerritt, larceny. Joseph Galloway, throwing missiles, indecent language. Neville Dwyer, battery. Sylvester Hogan, larceny. Raymond O'Gara, indecent language, arming with offensive weapons, throwing missiles. Martha Skerritt, larceny. Tomorrow's court, William Sullivan versus Donald Fergus, assault and battery. Agnes Roach versus Maggie Buffant, damages for trespass. Donald Sullivan versus Kathy Mead, assault and battery. It looks as if we handed on more than just our names.
The people of Montserrat today couldn't list many of the great names of Irish history, but there are two they all know: Arthur Guinness and Oliver Cromwell. The name of Guinness is, of course, held in high esteem, while that of Cromwell is mentioned with almost the same dread as in Ireland. It was under the press ganging of Cromwell that hundreds of people from Cork, Kilkenny and Drogheda were expelled to the West Indies. They would have arrived just as the first importations of African slaves took place. So, both cruelly uprooted from their homes, Irish and African Negro shared a common suffering, a common grievance, and for the most part lived together in peace and common understanding. However, there is a record of one insurrection of black slaves against their Irish masters.
St. Patrick's Day was chosen because the Irish would have been celebrating that day. And the slaves thought that this was a good day to perhaps take them unawares. In the end, the plot was betrayed by slaves themselves, and this could stem from perhaps some love for the Irish masters, I don't know.
Montserrat Catholics today are centred mainly on the area around Plymouth. This is probably due to the influence of one of the most famous Montserrat Irish families, the Hamiltons. Before the Catholics were allowed to have a church in the town, the Hamiltons gave their large business premises on Parliament Street as a place of worship. The building is still called Treselyan, or Shamrock House. The occasional priest visitor to Montserrat said Mass there. It kept a remnant of the faithful together.
I pray, Lord, that whatever I do, or whatever my hands find to do, Lord, it may be prosperous. I pray that whatever I do, it may be a help to others. What I can do, Lord, help me to do. Give me courage that I might be able to learn and labor truly for my honest living, that I will never beg my bread as long as I live. To Lord.
But whatever their present religious affiliations, the people of Montserrat still have a faith in the presence of God and the reality of His will in their lives, which is very similar to the country faith of the Irish. There must have been times when the Irish emigrant workers in Montserrat felt as if they were walking through the deep mists of a soft summer's day in Ireland. 4,500 miles to the northeast lay home, but once they left it, few returned to make that long and expensive journey across the Atlantic. So they tried to make Montserrat a home from home, a place where the old Irish customs and comforts would be enjoyed and preserved.
I've always heard that we speak with a distinct Irish brogue. That came to Montserrat traditionally, I think, because my mother told us of illicit distilling in the mountains. And the distillers used to seek a very a valley away from, almost away from habitation to do the distilling. And this rum was called Mountain Dew. And it was perfectly white, not colored at all. It was sold very cheap. I think it was 3 penny for a half a bottle. then.
Are you a dancer yourself?
Not very much, but my mother was a great dancer. And at evening, sometimes when she was at leisure, she used to dance the jig and show us the real Irish dance. So it's Irish is really seem to be in the blood. It is.
Ethnologists have described the Irish as the whitest race in the world. Certainly in the US, where Irish and Negro have lived in close proximity, the result has often been acute tension. Yet here in Montserrat, Irish and Negro have lived side by side in peace. Black or white, most of them didn't choose to come to Montserrat. Yet once here they formed a relationship which must be almost unique. It survived the running battles of French and English settlers. It survived the social revolution which brought about the ending of slavery. It even survived an occasional internal insurrection. And in Montserrat, Irish and Negro haven't just lived together in peace as two separate communities, but have merged into what is in effect almost a new race. Black in colour, but possessing many of the best traits of the Irish. Perhaps the white Irish of Ireland and America today have something to learn from the black Irish of Montserrat.
I've heard that the Irish are very friendly people, and I think that we took pages out of the Irish book for friendliness. In fact, Montserrat is known to be one of the most, or the most friendly island of the West Indies. You find people, as they go along, they say good morning, good afternoon. They like to converse. I mean, strangers don't look like strangers to them. They're really very friendly and hospitable. So, and I think that's typical of the Irish. Very typical of the Irish.
To the world, he's a hero. To the people of Ennis in County Clare, he's one of their own. And they were waiting for him, turning out in their hundreds to welcome the boxing legend back to his ancestral home. Greeted with a roar that could rival even the rumble in the jungle, the 3 times former world heavyweight champion, now suffering from Parkinson's disease, was here to unveil a monument near the spot where his ancestral home once stood. But how on earth does the world's greatest living boxer trace his roots back to County Clare? Muhammad Ali's great-grandfather Abe Grady was born in Ennis, but he emigrated to Kentucky in the 1860s. There he married a freed African-American slave. They had a son, John Lewis Grady, who married Birdie Moorhead, and she gave birth to Odessa Lee Grady, who married Cassius Clay Sr. They, in turn, had a son, Cassius Clay Jr., who, as we all now know, later changed his name to Muhammad Ali. Today, the Turnpike Road in Ennis is lined with neat council houses, none prouder than the home of the late Eileen O'Grady, whose daughter Mary kissed and hugged her famous distant cousin. Muhammad's boxing days may be long behind him, but could it be that his ancestry had something to do with his success? With 37 knockouts and 19 successful title defences, he must surely have a claim to have inherited something of the luck of the Irish.
Ali, 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 Ali. All right, yo, Ali. So yeah, part of his ancestry goes back to Ireland, and yeah, he's welcome there. He knows his ancestry. We might do his ancestry one day on genealogical stories. All right, we're gonna go ahead and hold up, guys. All right, we're gonna get another video ready. Hold on. Sorry. Hold on, don't go nowhere. I know a lot of people out there hurt. A lot of people out there hurt right now. Everybody gets this information, takes it all very personal. They get confused with what we're trying to say. A lot of people don't take the time to catch up. A lot of people just arrive to the channel. A lot of people got their cultural background and beliefs they carry with them. They don't empty their cup. And this is a channel where we do historical research, no matter if it goes against whatever you believe, that we got the sources. You got to start, emptying your cup and just trying to learn new things, because you're always a student. You never stop learning, That's, a lot of people have a problem, doing that, letting go and just, learning, because we never stop learning. All right. Let me get this other video ready. 1 second. Thanks for tuning in. Anybody donated, welcome to all the new members. I saw a couple new members activated today. You know, all right, 1 second. All right, go back to the video. Thanks for again tuning in. We got another. Don't go anywhere. We're still gonna be here for a while, okay? Don't go anywhere. And here we go. All right. Pura vida, yeah, let's go. What is this, huh? Look at that with her blue eyes. Early Irish people were black with blue eyes. New documentary suggests, all right? More correlation, and now even science is proving it, what we're saying. There's a new documentary that defies everything you may have thought about Irish people. In fact, the documentary titled The Boring Heart of Stone, make sure you guys go watch it on PBS, it's online, claims that people who inhabited the land nearly 10,000 years ago were not white, all right? We're talking about what? 10,000 years ago? We're talking about ancient. They weren't white with blonde hair and blue eyes, okay? Instead, Irish people were black. Irish people were black. So again, nobody's trying to blackwash anything, and nobody's trying to only focus or trying to make everybody so-called black. It's just truth. If it makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem. Cognitive dissonance is real, all right? Irish people were black with blue eyes, as first reported in Irish Times. Scientists in the documentary are using the technology typically used in forensic criminal investigations to explore Ireland's past in surprising new details. What they claim to have found is that black Irish people inhabited the island along the coast of the Barren as hunters for nearly 4,000 years. 4,000 years in Ireland. Who? Black, so-called black people, indigenous black Irish. Before they were replaced by settled farmers. They were what? Replaced? They are believed to have gathered shellfish and hazelnuts, as well as hunt wild boar in a region with a landscape of cliffs, caves, mountains, and more. Geneticist Dr. Laura Cassidy revealed that the people who moved into Ireland 4,000 years ago helped to establish the modern Irish gene pool as we know it today. Who? Black Irish. And Dr. Cassidy isn't alone with her discovery. In 2018, geneticists at the University College London at the Natural History Museum said that Cheddarman, a Mesolithic skeleton found in a cave in 1903, had dark to black skin with blue eyes and curly hair, as reported in the Irish Post. All right, we're here in the Irish Post. We've gone over this. Again, this is the first so-called Britain, right? This is how they're depicting them. So-called black skin with light green or blue eyes. It says here, first Irish people had dark to black skin, similar to Cheddarman in Britain. All right, Irish Post is not me blackwashing. It's science too. Irish people who lived thousands of years ago likely had black skin, similar to a discovery made in Britain this week, according to DNA research. On Wednesday, geneticists at University College London and the Natural History Museum revealed that Cheddarman, a Mesolithic skeleton found in a Somerset cave in 1903, had dark to black skin, the blue eyes and curly hair. Cheddarman, who had previously been portrayed as having brown eyes and light skin, was among the first permanent settlers to make the UK their home and is related to around 10% of the modern population there. Scientists extracted the DNA by drilling a hole into his skull and drawing out bone powder, with subsequent findings suggesting that light-skinned Europeans evolved later than previously thought. Evolved? Where did you evolve from? Speaking on RTE Morning Ireland, professor of population genetics at Trinity College Dublin means black dub, Dan Bradley said his team have made similar findings about early Irish people. So a bunch of all these professors and scientists, geneticists are concluding the same thing.
And right here we have Riddles of Prehistoric Times by James H. Anderson. It says here, the first inhabitants of southern Europe Northern Africa, Arabia, France, and the British Islands were a race of small men who did not average in height more than about 4 to 5 feet, 4 feet 5 inches. They were of slight build with dark complexion. They were cave dwellers, emanation from Lemuria, he says, all right? Lemuria. It is said that the first people in Ireland were the Formations. They were of dark, stunted race, utterly savage, using rough, unwrought stone implements. It says origin of the Anglo-Saxon race, a study of the settlement of England and the tribal origin of the Old English people by the late Thomas William Shore. All right, in the Irish annals, the Black Vikings are called Dub Gentí, or Black Gentiles. These Black Gentiles on some occasions fought against other plunderers of the Irish coast known as the Fair Gentiles, who can hardly have been others than the Fair Danes or Northmen. The year 851, the Black Gentiles came to Athcliath, Dublin, example Dublin. So that's the name, Dublin. In 852, we are told that 8 ships of the Finn Gentí arrived and fought against the Dub Gentí for 3 days, and that the Dub Gentí were victorious. The Black Vikings appear at this time to have had a settlement in or close to Dublin, and during the 9th century were much in evidence on the Irish coast. In 877, a great battle was fought at Loch Cuan between them and the Fair Gentiles, in which Alban, chief of the Black Gentiles, fell. He may well have been a chieftain of the race of the northern Sorbs of the Mecklenburg coast.
All right, so I'm going to read from this book now. It's called Early Man in Britain and His Place in the Tertiary Period by W. Boyd Dawkins. And these are his titles. It says curator of the Manchester Museum and professor of geology and paleontology in Owens College, Manchester. All right, this is from 1880. A little further down, it says in Scotland, the small dark Highlander. All right, Scotland, the dark Highlander, and in Ireland, the Black Celts. The Black Celts to the west of the Shannon still preserve the Iberian characteristics in more or less purity crossed with Celtic, Danish, Norse, and English blood. Another book is called The Place of the Welsh in the History of Britain by, again, Professor Boyd Dawkins, Honorary Fellow of the Jesus College, Oxford, reprinted by the Manchester Examiner. This is from 1889. It says here, the place of the Welsh in the history of Britain. Again, ancestry of the small dark Welsh, the small dark Welsh. We need not, however, go so far as the Pyrenees to find people identical with the small dark Welsh. The small dark Irish, again, the small dark Irish, because we're going to get into the Irish, the small dark Irish of the southwest of Ireland, the small dark Highlander of Scotland, the Highlander, who was the Highlander? The Stuarts were in the Highlanders, and the dark inhabitants of Devon and Cornwall are physically of the same race. The recent researches of Beddoe prove also that the small dark Yorkshireman and Derbyshireman are of the same small dark stock. All right, all these dark, swarthy, dark, so-called black Europeans. The Irish Times newspaper. Early Irish people were dark-skinned with blue eyes. Documentary. All right. Hunter-gatherer population inhabited Ireland before being replaced by early farmers. Again, techniques normally used in forensic criminal investigations have revealed surprising details about prehistoric Irish people. What did they reveal, huh? What did they reveal, huh? Prehistoric Irish people were dark-skinned and had blue eyes, a new documentary claims. All right, they don't just claim. It's not just claims. The hunter-gatherer population that lived in Ireland 10,000 years ago do not have any of the pigmentation profiles associated with light skin. It doesn't appear. It's not in the genes. Stop making things up. They inhabited the island for 4,000 years before being replaced by settled farmers. All right, let's get a close-up. All right, this is what they're showing as an example. So picture this. When you say prehistoric Irish, original Irish, this is what you should picture. This is what they want you to picture. You know, Bob Marley with blue eyes, literally. That's what they want you to picture. And you see his brown, brown complexion, right? The information is contained in a documentary about the burying in Cochlear broadcast on RTE on Sunday. According to TCD geneticist Dr. Laura Cassidy, techniques normally used in forensic criminal investigations have revealed surprising details about prehistoric Irish people. Scientists have been developing a genetic database of ancient Irish genomes from all periods of prehistory to understand how the modern Irish gene pool came about. She said the hunter-gatherer Irish not only had dark skin, but also bright blue eyes, a combination rarely seen today. They operated mostly along the coast of the Bullren, gathering shellfish and then moving inland to hunt wild boar and gather hazelnuts. The Bullren's unique geological landscape means it has preserved evidence of millennia of settlement in the area of West Clare. The hunter-gatherers were replaced by early farmers. The earliest evidence of farmers in Ireland in the Bullren, they arrived approximately 6,000 years ago in what was known as the Neolithic era. So again, here's a better picture. So this is what they want you to picture again when you're thinking about prehistoric Irish. So I want to just remind everybody, just because you see people with blue eyes doesn't mean they have a white ancestor. This was original to black folks too, people of color, indigenous people around the world. And when you say Irish, it doesn't mean it was a white ancestor, okay? So you got to really rethink your genealogy and your ancestry and look at it with fresh new eyes. I'm going to read from this book real quick. It says here, Proclamation 1625, America's Enslavement of the Irish by Herbert L. Bird, Jr. And this is chapter 3. It says here, Transported, and it's going to talk about Charles the First. All right, we're going to go to the next page. It says, Charles continued his father's quest with the colonization of Ireland. Remember Charles I, Charles II, all these were swarthy people. We got the videos, right, recently. We proved that we showed the primary sources describing these people. And the attempted eradication of its people. Listen to this. So these are swarthy people, melanated folks, enslaving, getting rid of other melanated people, too, in Europe. So it wasn't just about color, guys. It's not about generalizing. This ain't about a Korean color war. Jails were emptied of Irish prisoners and readied for transport to be sold as slaves. Slaves, all right? Sold as slaves, okay? Over 30,000 prisoners were shipped to Barbados, Montserrat, St. Lucia, St. Christopher, now St. Kitts, and the mainland British colonies. So all the way back with Charles I, they were doing this in Ireland, sending them to where? The plantations of the Americas. Who? Irish. But the Irish prisoners' numbers were not enough for the labor required in the mainland colonies and the sugar plantations in the West Indies. So the spirit kidnappers went to work to meet the market demand. All right, remember, we've gone over this. Spiriting was literally kidnapping. They were spiriting children, adults, all kinds of people, the unwanted, poor people all over Europe, especially with the Irish, and sending them to the colonies of America to work in the plantations. It wasn't Africans they were sending over here because they already had the labor with the American Indians, the local labor they could enslave. When they needed more, they were sending their unwanted, undesirables of Europe. As it says here, they were spiriting, kidnapping people and children, swarthy Europeans. Don't think these are pale skin only. Just as the British authorities did to the English poor, just like they did to the English poor, this is what I'm saying. The authorities made the Irish prisoners by creating petty crimes against them. If you were Irish, once you became a prisoner, you were eligible to be transported and sold as a slave. The slave trade was very profitable, and the kidnappers set out to round up the Irish. Groups of kidnappers went out to fill quotas by capturing whomever crossed their paths. The kidnappers at times were overly zealous and captured a number of French and English and several thousand Scots in the process. Throw them all in there, right? If these victims weren't saved in time by a loved one with power or money, their capture was steadfast. In 1629, all right, all the way back in the 1600s, a large group of Irish men and women were sent to Guyana, right? Guyana, where? Guyana. They were sent to Guyana, French Guiana. Remember we saw that video? What if a lot of those Maroons, right, were actually black Irish that were joining these tribes in the Amazon, right? That's actually what a lot of it was. We got living descendants. I know living descendants of actual Maroons that confirm what I'm saying, but they also mix with the American indigenous people of the area. They have a lot of indigenous blood, but they added the whole African thing to a lot of that too. All right? You got to dodge the hijack. This is what I'm saying. It's not always Indian. Again, a large group of Irishmen and women were sent to Guyana, and by 1632, Irish were the main slaves sold to Antigua and Montserrat in the West Indies. They were the main slaves, Irish. All right? So think about it. If these were all pale-skinned white people like you're thinking today, where is their descendants? These people on these islands should be a lot lighter if that's the case. But in reality, these were swarthy Irish, so-called Negro Irish. They were getting rid of in Ireland. Just something to think about. I mean, be logical, right? By 1637, a census showed that 69% of the inhabitants of Montserrat in the West Indies were Irish slaves, right? There's footnotes for this. The first groups of English prisoners and kidnapped children had experienced inhumane conditions on the ships, but the Irish prisoners' transport to the New World was far worse. The Irish slaves were chained in holds that were on average 6 square feet. They were chained from ankle to wrist. In addition, the male slaves were chained by their neck to prevent attacks to crew members who went below deck. Listen, these were not Africans. They always told you it was Africans. Remember, these are black Irish. They were chained from ankle to wrist. In addition, the male slaves were chained by their necks to prevent attacks to crew members who went below deck. When the slaves were brought on deck, 40 to 50 of them were chained together to keep them from trying to stage a mutiny or commit suicide by jumping overboard. These are the same stories they told us about so-called African slaves. Hygiene was non-existent, and slaves experienced dehydration, dysentery, and scurvy, which led to high mortality rates. Many were thrown overboard to avoid infecting others. This was not good. The slave owners saw this as a loss of profit. Again, you see, this is a real Middle Passage. This is really happening. This is recorded. But they told you it was happening in a different way. And they told you it was coming out of Africa, and that was false. The passage across the Atlantic typically would take 9 to 12 weeks, depending on the weather. Food was always an issue aboard ship. There sometimes wasn't enough food to feed both the slaves and the crew. If a slave died due to starvation during the passage, the insurance company would pay for the loss. All right, they were insured. Listen to this. This is a real venture, a business venture. They had charters business, right? Companies, right? The Somers Island companies, the Virginia company, Massachusetts, the Plymouth company. So they had insurance backing any losses up. So when there was a food shortage, the solution was to throw slaves overboard. The ship's captain would claim they died of sickness or were lost at sea. One ship was cited for dumping 1,302 Irish slaves into the Atlantic Ocean on a single passage so that the crew would have plenty of food to eat. All right? This is recorded. And the ship's names and everything. We've read this information before a lot. Check out my indentured servitude, white servitude videos. Under the worst of conditions such as sickness, suicide, and even murder at the hands of the slave crew and captains, ships would lose most of their human cargo. On average, the Irish slave ships lost 20 to 30% on the passage to the New World. And in the bottom paragraph here regarding Oliver Cromwell and the Irish Protestants and Catholic Irish in their war, the Irish Rebellion of 1641, and then Oliver Cromwell's retaliation. He was Protestant. So it says here, Cromwell harbored a hostile attitude toward the Irish, for both religious and political reasons. He was passionately opposed to the Catholic Church because of the power of the papal and clerical authority over the people. As for political reasons, the Irish killing of Protestants during the Irish Rebellion of 1641 was foremost on his mind. Cromwell started his war with Ireland in August 1649 with an attack against Drogheda, a prosperous town just north of Dublin. Remember, Dublin means black. Cromwell's army overtook that town, slaughtering soldiers, men, women, and children. Catholic priests were considered combatants and were killed on sight. Cromwell, in his first letter back to the Council of State, said of Drogheda, "I believe we put the sword the whole number of the defendants. I do not think 30 of the whole number escaped with their lives. Over 3,500 people died in the massacre. Those who survived were transported and sold as slaves to the West Indies and the American colonies." Slaves, all right? Slaves to the West Indies. Cromwell wrote after the campaign, "I am persuaded that this is a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches who have imbrued their hands in so much innocent blood, and that will tend to prevent the infusion of blood for the future, which are satisfactory grounds for such actions which otherwise cannot but work remorse and regret." That's Oliver Cromwell's words. He really hated the Catholics. Remember, the Protestants, the crypto Jews and crypto Moors, a lot of them. All right, so the format of the images and the text here is really bad in this book, but I can kind of see the wording. It says here, with each victory, Cromwell and his generals cleansed the land of the Irish. Thousands were transported and sold as slaves. Massive transportation of the Irish across the Atlantic to the New World continued and reached its peak in 1652 to 1653. The Council of State authorized the governors of precincts to transport and sell as slaves 8,000 Irish. They also granted the authorization to transport and sell as slaves 400 Irish children for the New England and Virginia colonies. Slave contracts were assigned with Boston merchants, allowing them to come and score the ports along Ireland's southern and eastern coast to capture men and women. Hundreds of Irish men and women were captured at the ports and transported to the New World. With the abductions and kidnappings at the levels they were, even some English and Scottish were captured and sent to Barbados to work in the sugarcane fields or to Virginia. Continuing a little further in the book with Cromwell's mission to get rid of the Irish Catholics, right? It says, during the 12 years of Irish rebellion, we're at the bottom here, the Irish population fell from 1,466,000 to 616,000. Over 550 Irishmen were killed, and 300,000 were sold as slaves to the sugar planters in Barbados, in Jamaica, and throughout the West Indies. The women and children who were left homeless and destitute also had to be dealt with. The British solution was to round them up and sell them as slaves. Over 100,000 Irish Catholic children were taken from their parents and sold as slaves, many to Virginia and New England. After Cromwell returned to England, one of his generals, General Henry Ireton, adopted a policy of deliberate crop burning and starvation. That policy was responsible for the majority of the estimated deaths. We continue in chapter 4. It says here, arrival from the ship. Upon arrival in the colonies, Irish slaves were put up for sale by the ship captains or the merchants who owned them. Families who made the passage together to the New World were often separated when each was sold to the highest bidder. They were paraded before the bidders like cattle at a livestock auction. Again, same stories they told us they were doing to these so-called Africans. They were doing this to Irish. And again, remember, these are so-called Black Irish. Put it all into perspective. Their teeth were sometimes checked, and many had to strip naked for the buyer's inspection. In the years 1651, 1660, Oliver Cromwell alone is said to have had transported over 130,000 Irish slaves to the American colonies and the West Indies. The estimates vary among renowned historians. John P. Prendergast estimates 80,000. Anthony Bourdain 100,000. Thomas Addis Emmett 120 to 130,000. And Dr. John Lingard 60,000. Now I'm going to ask you a logical question. Now you see all these numbers that would multiply. These people would have descendants. And all these places where they ended up in the West Indies, you know, you would see more lighter skinned so-called white people there living. And you guys know that most of the people in these islands are so-called black folks. There aren't exact statistics on the transport of Irish slaves for various reasons. For one, ships weren't allowed to sail directly from Ireland to the New World. By law, they had to visit an English port before clearance papers would be granted. As a result, every Irish immigrant, slave or servant, crossing in an Irish or English vessel from either Ireland or England appeared in the official records as English. All right, a lot of them were labeled English. According to law, the voyage didn't begin until the ship cleared from English port. Hence, all the passengers on arrival in the American colonies were rated as English. All right, so here again, the image is a little messed up on the text, but these are some Runaway ads, okay? I've shown this a lot. We're gonna show some examples. It's showing some here. I'm gonna read here again. It says, the following advertisements for Runaways are from the Maryland Gazette, the Virginia Gazette, the Pennsylvania Gazette. We've shown these. All right, check this one out right here. It says, Runaway from the subscriber living in Lancaster, a native Irish servant woman named Katie Norton, who came from the county of Wicklow in Ireland. Last fall, she is about 25 to 26 years of age, of a dark complexion, all right, swarthy, dark complexion, has black hair, talks in the Irish dialect. She rocks in her walk, all right, she rocks in her walk, and is pretty sharp in talking. She is a cunning hussy, and no doubt will pass a while for an honest woman, as she has good clothes with her and can behave herself. All right, so that's her description, dark complexion, a native Irish servant. And there's another one right here. It says, Runaway last night from the workhouse in Chester, a servant girl that belonged to Thomas Blair in West New Jersey. She was advertised some time ago in the Gazette by the name of Elizabeth Burke, but changes her name often. Is about 18 years of age, of small stature, dark complexion, and speaks much through her nose. All right, again, dark complexion, had on a blue calimanco stripped linsey petticoat and black silk bonnet, was barefooted. £4 reward and reasonable charges. All right, again, dark complexion. These are all Irish. Right here in the notes, it says, runaway servants and slaves would often take refuge in a nearby friendly Indian community. All right, who? Irish, dark-skinned Irish? Yes, it's not just Indian maroons, okay? This is what I'm trying to explain to you. Those who weren't caught and brought back to the colonies assimilated well into the Native American communities. Who? Black Irish runaways.
Oh no, 1736, when George Washington was 6 years old, it says here, his father Augustine Washington
placed an advertisement seeking the capture of a servant of his who had run away in company with other servants. Now remember, George Washington, I did a whole video on this. He only had mostly indentured servants, Europeans, in his plantation. All right, go check out the video.
Edward Ormsby is a small thin fellow of a swarthy complexion, and is a tailor by trade, has a hesitation of stammering in his speech, and being an Irishman in his swarthy complexion, had a good deal of brogue. They went away from Captain Island's landing on Potomac in a small boat, and are supposed to be gone towards the eastern shore of North Carolina. Whoever will secure the said bricklayers, so that he may be again, shall have £5 rewards beside what the law allows. All right, so they're like, please bring back my Irishman. Now, it says Virginia Gazette, Parks, Williamsburg, from August 10th to August 17th, 1739, right? It says, ran away the 8th of July, last, from the subscribers living in Westmoreland County, 4 servant men, with John McHugh, Francis Mann, Daniel Fitzpatrick, and John Freelove. John McHugh is an Irishman of middle stature. He's swarthy complexion. He's an Irishman. John McHugh, Mac. Remember the Mac. John McHugh is an Irish man. He has on one of his arms a bleeding heart pricked in gunpowder and name length. Several other letters. All right. So okay. Then we get Francis Mann. Francis Mann is an Englishman. All right, so now we got an Englishman, right? Not just an Irishman. We got a Briton, right? An Englishman, a middle stature, and he's also swarthy complexion.
It says here, Proclamation, 1625, America's Enslavement of the Irish by Herbert L. Bird, Jr. Continuing a little bit further in the book, it says here, Chapter 7, the Irish became white. Huh? The Irish were not considered white and were not accepted in white society. Their skin color didn't automatically qualify them to be classified as white. All right, dodge the hijack, because it really wasn't about the skin color, you know, deep down. That's why they weren't considered white, because a lot of them were swarthy, as we just got, dark complexion, right? They were seen as lacking culture and unable to govern themselves. Many European immigrants groups arriving in America were classified as other. This was a probationary white status until they were completely accepted. Now listen to this, but the Irish were classified as colored, a classification also given to American blacks. Again, but the Irish were classified as colored. The Irish were classified as colored. You guys hearing this? A classification also given to American so-called blacks. All right, colored. The Irish were classified as colored. Pay attention. The document shown below was taken from the blog of Michael O'Malley, a professor of U.S. history at George Mason University who blogs at the Apologetic. It demonstrates that the Irish at one time were classified as colored. It also demonstrates the extent of passing in America. All right, let's take a look at that. All right, see where it says the yellow, right under where it says grandfather, it says colored, right there it says colored. Patrick O'Malley, all right, I don't know if they did this on purpose so you wouldn't be able to see, but we can see what it says. It says, this is the marriage license of my great-great-grandfather born in Ireland in 1854 and married to a Virginia native in 1884, a Virginia native, listen. And he's a colored Irish who married a Virginia native. You'll notice it's given as colored, all right? He's colored. Since when are Irishmen colored? That's a good question. My father found this when he started doing family history after he retired. We mostly laughed a lot when he revealed it at a family Christmas party that year. He sent us all Kwanzaa cards as a joke. You hear that? They were making fun. They found that their great-great-grandfather was colored, a colored man from Ireland. But being a historian, I couldn't help but be fascinated. I'd read some of the literature on whiteness, notably Ignatius' How the Irish Became White, and I'd been highly skeptical. It seemed to me to be sort of related to the kind of whining white college kids did about how they were discriminated against because they did not have a white studies program on campus. That's not what Ignatius had in mind, but I thought the Irish were not white. Bit was wildly overstated. I was clearly wrong, and looking into it a little more resulted in a whole class lesson around the image of the Irish in the 19th century and the range of anti-Irish nativism. It focused on the melancholy of stereotypes and how what seems natural and obvious in one era seems odd in the next. But still, how to explain this document? It was his marriage certificate. Surely even the greenest Irish immigrant knew enough to avoid being classed as colored. If you take a close look at it, it gets more and more interesting. Here is the full scan. All right, so you guys can see it says colored. So we got Patrick O'Malley, colored, Hester Holland, colored. All right, they both colored. All right, he's Irish, she's a Virginia native, whatever that means. But we already know, most likely indigenous. Right away, there are some oddities. His wife, Hester Holland, a Virginia native, is also listed as colored. Again, major drop. So we got an Irish man listed as colored who married a Virginia Indian woman, an indigenous woman who's also being labeled colored. Do you guys see? This is real history. This is real genealogy. You gotta dodge the hijack and stop saying, no, maybe they were tan. No, they were just being classified like that because blah, 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 blah. Nothing. These are colored people. These would be called so-called African Americans today. This is a marriage certificate. This is the kind of things you find when you do genealogy correctly. Now, I want to prove something to you. In case people think this is just one case of an O'Malley who is colored or so-called black. All right? I'm going to prove to you that the original O'Malley dynasty founder was actually black, so-called black, a Swarthy founder of the O'Malley dynasty. All right, real quick, just to corroborate, it says here Grace O'Malley. Who's Grace O'Malley? Also known as Granny O'Malley or Granny Umal, was the head of the O'Malley dynasty in the west of Ireland, okay? And the daughter of Eogan Dubdara O'Malley, all right, Dub, black, right? In Irish folklore, she is commonly known as Granny Mahal, English as Granuali, and is a well-known historical figure in 16th century Irish history. It says in popular culture, she is often referred to as the pirate queen, all right? She's literally a female pirate, a famous female pirate from Ireland, okay? Why am I showing you guys her? I found this in the Galway County Council Public Libraries. It says here the Galway Reader. This is from 1951, volume 3. Just want to zoom into this part right here. It says some facts about Griana Wali, all right? Same person we just read about. It says, it is strange considering her legendary fame, how little there is actually known about the pirate queen, Grace O'Malley, or Runaway Wali, as it is in Irish, the Four Masters. Do not mention her, though it has mentioned her father, her husbands, and her sons. And except for a few unreliable folk tales, such meager information as we have come from English state papers of that period, letters that the English commanders wrote home to the State Council in London, it seems that she was born about 1536, that is roughly about 400 years ago, and at the castle of Rockfleet, or Carrinahuli, as it is called in Irish, a straightly built four-sided tower, three sides of which are surrounded by tidal waters, situated on the coast of Mayo. There's a place called Mayo in Ireland, Maya, one letter off. Her father was an Owen O'Malley, who was nicknamed Dubdara, or the Black Oak. The Black Oak, why was he called that? On account of his swarthy complexion. He was black, so-called black Irish. Dubdara, the head of the O'Malleys. You hear this? The head of the O'Malley dynasty was nicknamed the Black Oak because of his swarthy complexion, because of his black dark-skinned complexion, which tradition says Gruanua inherited, which she inherited, okay? She's also so-called black. But this famous Irish pirate queen from Ireland was swarthy, okay? She got it from her daddy. All right, now we're going to read from this book. It's called To Hell or Barbados, The Ethnic Cleansing of Ireland by Sean O'Callaghan. We're in chapter 3 of this book. It says here, one question still remained to be resolved by Parliament. What to do with the 34,000? Some historians put the figure as high as 40,000. Irish prisoners of war held in gaols and camps throughout Ireland. Their upkeep, such as it was, had become a strain on the exchequer. Cromwell's solution to send them as slaves to Barbados was unworkable. It would have been feasible to send 30 or so he had captured in Drogheda, or even 300. But if 34,000 or 40,000 were sent, they would have outnumbered the planters 2 to 1. Parliament finally decided to allow the men to go to any country of their choice, not at war with England, France, Spain, Austria, and Poland. Listen, there was certainly a demand for these Irish soldiers abroad. Irish soldiers. Irishmen had been fighting in the various armies of Europe from the time of Queen Elizabeth I. Irish regiments served in the Low Countries, and many who had seen service in the 7-year wars returned to Ireland to fight the parliamentarians there. The Prize of Orange declared that they were born soldiers. Henry IV of France called Hugh O'Neill the defender of Clonmel and Limerick the third soldier of his age, and stated no nation produced better troops than the Irish if they were properly drilled and led. Even an Englishman, Sir John Norris, praised their valor and said that he knew no nation where there were so few fools or cowards. Recruiting agents from many countries flocked to Ireland to enlist their services. Don Ricardo White in May 1654 shipped 7,000 men from the ports of Waterford, Kinsale, Galway, Limerick, and Bantry for service in the Spanish army. In the following September, Colonel Christopher Mayo sent another batch of 3,000 to serve the Spanish king. In chapter 6, it's called the Irish White Slave Trade. It says here the commissioners of Ireland were only too willing to oblige Cromwell by getting rid of a surplus and potentially dangerous population. In January 1654, they ordered the governors of Carlisle, Kilkenny, Clonmel, Ross, Wexford, and Waterford to arrest and deliver to Captains Thomas Morgan, Captain Morgan, right? Thomas Morgan, the pirate, Dudley North, and John Johnson, English merchants. All right, so who's the merchants? Sephardic Jews, all right, crypto Jews, crypto Moors, Muslims. These are the merchants. All wanderers, men and women, and other Irish within their prisons, as should not prove that they had such a settled course of industry as yielded them a means of their own to maintain them. All such children as were in hospitals or workhouses, all prisoners, men and women, to be transported to the West Indies. The governors were to transfer the people who were rounded up to the ports of shipping, but these were to be provided for and maintained by the contractors. Sir William Petty, who had carried out the Down Survey of Ireland, described the Irish slave trade in his book, The Political Anatomy of Ireland. Thus, the widows and orphans, the deserted wives and families of the swordsmen were kidnapped and transported by the slave trading merchants of Bristol. All right, Bristol, we got that book from Bristol showing how Bristol was a big major slave port and sending all these Europeans to the West Indies. We got the primary sources, the historical records listing the names and everything. So all these people being kidnapped and transported by the slave trading merchants of Bristol, all right, Bristol, which their previous experience enabled them to organize with advantage to themselves. In September, Captain John Vernon was employed by the commissioners for Ireland and signed a contract on their behalf to supply Mr. Selleck and Mr. Jomans, Bristol merchants, with 250 women above the age of 12 years to be found in the country within a 20-mile radius of Cork, Youghal, Kinsale, Waterford, and Wexford, and then transport them to Barbados and New England. Lord Broghill, governor of Cork, assured the commissioners that he could find in a short time the 250 within the environs of Cork alone. He's like, don't worry, I got you. I can find you 250 slaves right now just in Cork alone. I got you, don't worry. Again, they're not in Africa doing this. Wake up. Elliot O'Donnell, in his book, The Irish Abroad, gives an account of the fate of young girls seized for transshipment abroad. While in the majority of cases, those destined for the plantations were put aboard ships in Irish ports, O'Donnell gives an example of Irish girls shipped from Cork to Bristol and there put aboard a slave ship. It is a harrowing account. Between the years of 1651 and 1654, over 40,000 Celtic Irishmen, all right, Celtic Irishmen, the ancient Celtic, all right, Irishmen marched away to die with all their accustomed gallantry, many winning unperishable renown in the services of France, Spain, Poland, and Italy. Having thus succeeded in deporting the men, Cromwell next turned his attention to the women. Hearing that the planters in New England and the West Indies were wary of maroons and would pay any price for a white woman, so-called white, Puritan Cromwell at once volunteered to supply their needs. Gangs of his soldiers invaded Connaught and pouncing on all the women and girls they could find, drove them in gangs to Cork. It was the work of 1603 over again, only on a much larger and even more revolting scale. The young pretty women were frequently violated, the older and uglier beaten and branded. From Cork, they were taken to Bristol, and after being publicly sold in the market there, all right, so listen to this, publicly sold. Do you think this was really pale-skinned white people? Remember what they told you in school? They didn't tell you white people were being sold like this. So after they were publicly sold, they were thrust on board ships and borne to their final destination. The mind shrinks from imagining the horrors of their suffering at sea. From the records of survivors, they must have been at least equal to any of the sufferings experienced by African slaves on their way to America. All right, touch the hijack. But you see what he's telling you? It's the same thing. This is where Mr. Alex Haley got his ideas from. And also the book that he plagiarized, the other author got his ideas from, So-Called African. This is where they were reading. But as certainly did not happen in the case of the latter. Their hardships excited no sympathy in England. The inhabitants of Bristol watched them being packed on board and driven below with the same dull curiosity and phlegm which they displayed in watching the embarkation of cattle. To them, doubtless, there was little to choose between a cow and an Irish Roman Catholic. Continuing, it says here, we shall never know the exact number of Irishmen and women and children transported to the living hell of the West Indies and the Americas. All right, they don't want to tell you it's a lot. The numbers vary from as low as 12,000 by R.F. Foster in Modern Ireland, 1988, to 50,000 a year. 50,000 a year, and they're being modest probably. Now remember how many years they were doing this for. 50,000 a year, which was the figure given by Cardinal Rinuccini, who described the desperate ply of the Irish put aboard the slave ships. The Reverend Father Thomas Quinn, S.J., who somehow managed to avoid capture and transportation, wrote a report in Latin to Rome entitled The State and Condition of Irish Catholics from the year 1652 to 1656. It stated in part, and so these heretics, the English, caused the poor Catholics to be sent in crowded ships to Barbados, a middle passage, listen, and the islands of America and the other islands, such that those that did not die in the open remained in perpetual servitude, indentures for life, chattel, all right? That you ever hear of so-called white people being chattel for life, perpetual servants for life? I believe that some 60,000, this is a primary source, listen. He said, I believe that at least some 60,000 were sent there. The husbands expelled first to Spain and the Netherlands, whilst the wives and offsprings were destined for America, such that there was a perpetual divorce. Thus, what God and nature had joined, the barbarous tyranny of the heretics separated. According to the Reverend T.N. Burke, in his series of lectures and sermons published in the New York's Irish American in the last century, some 80,000 to 100,000 men of Ireland were driven south to the ports of Munster, where they were shipped to the sugar plantations of Barbados. These are not Africans. All right, this is in chapter 7. It's called The Slavery of Sugar, right? And it's very interesting. It clearly states here who really set up the sugar plantations in Barbados. And we already gone over this. Who really started this stuff was really back in Africa. And the Muslims were doing this, the Arabs, and Morocco especially. And then Sephardic Jews and Muslims were bringing this skill with them to the Americas. It says here in the bottom, it says the Sephardic Jews brought their know-how of sugar milling, their capital, and their slaves with them to Barbados. And again, Sephardic Jews are people of color, so-called Negro people, especially in these colonial times. Wherever they went, they brought with them their skills as businessmen and their experience as sugar planters, refiners, and brokers. They also brought with them the machinery needed for sugar refining and advance money on long credit to the planters to buy it. They taught them the art of planting, harvesting, and milling, and most important of all, sold them their black slaves, so-called black slaves, again, either on long credit or against the first refined sugar produced. Before the advent of sugar, there were only a few hundred black slaves on the island purchased from Dutch slave traders. Who's the Dutch? Now let's go back to the previous videos, how we all broke this down. Sephardi Jews, who were they really enslaving and all that. It says Cromwell thought his victories in England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland solved their problem by shipping prisoners of war to Barbados. This not only solved the problem of what to do with potentially seditious population, but also earned money for the Commonwealth. These prisoners were not sent as indentured servants, but were sold in perpetuity to the sugar planters of Barbados. Listen, because a lot of people always say, Kurimeo is not the same. White people got freed after. No, you're not understanding real history. The false slave narratives they gave us are not correct. That Kunta Kinte stuff, that was just a movie. Again, there was Irish, right? Europeans being sold in perpetuity, meaning forever, not as indentures, to the sugar planters of Barbados, sugar plantations. Where are these so-called white people's descendants? If that was white people, where are they? Old records in the Barbados Museum and Historical Society files show that according to planners' estimates, Barbados alone received thousands of prisoners, again, thousands of prisoners of war who were regarded as white slaves, all right, so-called white. Remember, a survey carried out in 1650, even before the advent of the Irish white slaves there, showed that the island had a population of 20,000 white men. The first evidence we have of white men being sold is from Wales, where 240 Welsh bachelors were sold in May 1648 for a shilling each and shipped to Barbados. All right. Now, I want to emphasize that in these years, nobody was using the word white in the primary sources. We've already gone over this. Make sure you guys catch up to the previous presentations. If all these people were so-called pale skin, where are their descendants in history? Because all these islands, we already know in modern times, when we came to be, in our lifetime, all we saw was people of color living there. There should be more so-called white people there today. People should be more lighter, according to what we're seeing with these numbers here. 10,000 prisoners were taken at the Battle of Worcester. All right, 10,000 prisoners, mainly Scots. All right, mainly Scots. We already know about the Scots. All right, Scots with some German mercenaries, is going to say, all right, Scots and German mercenaries. This is chapter 11, again, of the book, To Hell or Barbados, the ethnic cleansing of Ireland. It says here, the cabbage stalk soldiers. Oliver Cromwell's Western design, which led to the subsequent capture of Jamaica, involved Irishmen, both indentured servants and slaves. Firstly as impressed and unwilling soldiers in the expedition against the Spaniards, and secondly as settlers in Jamaica. All right, so they get rid of two birds with one stone, right? Get rid of the people they don't want in Ireland and then use them as soldiers and settlers in Jamaica. Cromwell's grandiose scheme for the capture of all the Spanish-held territories in the West Indies was a flawed one, based almost entirely on inadequate intelligence and unsound advice from men like Martin Noel, Thomas Povey, and a man named Thomas Gage. Martin Noel had come a long way from being a port tobacco planter of 1638. His slaving activities and sugar plantation had made him a very rich man. He left Barbados in 1650 and the following year became an alderman of the City of London and a member of the East India Company. The first group of Spanish settlers had arrived in Jamaica in 1510 under the captaincy of Diego Columbus, son of the great explorer. They called their chief town Villa de la Vega, which is now known as Spanish Town. When the settlers arrived, there were about 100,000 Arawaks living peacefully on the island, whom the Spaniards attempted to Christianize and enslave. Listen to this. Who did they enslave? They didn't bring Africans with them. They didn't go to Africa and brought Africans to help them settle and create these Spanish town, right? Well, who did they enslave? Arawaks. They had already people there to enslave. Again, where's the Africans? After a few decades, the Arawaks were almost wiped out. Oh, really? They were wiped out? Or did you enslave them and started classifying them as Negroes? Bishop Bartolome de las Casas wrote of the Spanish cruelties in Jamaica, which bore out Thomas Gage's version. The island of St. John in Jamaica, that looked a fruitful garden in 1610, was possessed by the Spaniards with the same bloody intention as the others were, for they also exercised their accustomed cruelties, killing, burning, roasting men, and throwing them to dogs, as if they had come to rid the earth of these innocent and harmless creatures, of whom above 60,000 were murdered in these two islands. So lavish were the Spanish swords of the blood of these poor souls, scarce 200 more remaining, the rest perished without the least knowledge of God. The fleet arrived at Jamaica on May 10, 1655, and the troops landed almost opposed at a place called Passage Ford. The small Spanish force retreating towards Spanish Town, the capital, Venables, and the other army commanders, instead of a swift pursuit, held a council of war. After a couple of wasted days, they advanced warily, always fearful of an ambush. They were talking about the cabbage stalk soldiers, all right? These were Irish indentured servants being forced, all right, to go there and fight for them. The weak Spanish garrison of less than 1,000 men decided to surrender and send emissaries under a flag of truce to the English commander. Negotiations dragged on for a week, and this gave the inhabitants of Spanish Town time to hide their valuables. All right, so that was the story of the cabbage stack soldiers, who were, some of the first Irish settlers in Jamaica. They came in to help, fight, get rid of the Spaniards, the Catholic Spaniards who were there. So it says here, chapter 12, the Irish in Jamaica. Now, in this chapter, it talks about the cabbage stack soldiers and what happened to them. It says, for a start, all the soldiers with the Western Design expedition, including the cabbage stack soldiers, who were mainly Irish indentured servants and slaves, were to be freed and given 30 acres each. There were, however, not nearly enough of them. Of the 7,000 men Venables landed in Jamaica, 3,500 had died of various diseases, and another 700 had been killed in action against the Spanish and Maroons during the conquest of the island. So it seems they were having a hard time really getting Irish people to go there and settle and colonize. So it says here, indentured servants were to have their indentures cut short, and select Irish slaves were to be given their freedom if they agreed to go to Jamaica. They were also to be given 30 acres of land. In that way, almost 2,000 were shipped to the island to begin work as freemen there. Yeah, you hear this? And a lot of those were black folks, so-called black Irish. It is ironic that the very men who profited from the sale of slaves in Barbados, Noel and Povey, were now advocating their freedom. Cromwell, who bore the prime responsibility for sending them there, also advocated their transfer to Jamaica as freemen. He wrote to Governor Cyril instructing him to encourage emigration to Jamaica, and as a sweetener declared that Jamaican goods were to be free of customs for 7 years in Barbados. So this book is called Ancient and Modern Britons, a retrospect. This is from volume 1. All right, continuing in the book, it says, but at any rate, the people known as Iberians were spread all over the British Islands, whether indigenous or immigrants, and some of their tribes were known as Damoni and Siluris. This seems to be generally admitted. Physically, they were swarthy of color. All right, they were swarthy of color and curly hair, and were bearded like goats. They, or some clans of them, worshipped the gods, and both men and women professed a knowledge of the future. So then the Druids, in Druidesses, who had colleges in an island near the coast of Brittany, who professed a knowledge of the future, who the men at least were figured as bearded like goats, and who worshipped the gods, were dark-skinned, curly-haired Iberians of the tribe of the Siluris of the Moni. All right, they're letting you know, are they these original Celts? Perhaps this distinction does not exist, but at any rate, if the small dark Highlander and the black Celt to the west of Shannon be assumed to be the descendants of Iberians, it may fairly be argued that with so much intermixture with fairer races during the last 2,000 years, the stock must now be lighter skinned than then, and its representatives of the first century must have been actually as black as Negroes. As a matter of fact, Pliny characterizes their complexion as Ethiopian, that is, as black as an Ethiopian. And it may be that the
curliness of their hair was of the same nature as a Negro also. Thus the Negritos of Huxley, the owners of such skulls as those found in Caithness, may have been allied to the ancient Iberians. The wild tribes of Ireland were black men. It's hinted by the fact that a wild Irishman is Gaelic, a black Irishman, dubbed Irenach. But it is held by some writers, as stated a page or two back, that the title Scot was given in contempt by the enemies of this people, and that it signifies scuilty, vagabond. While there is no proof of the 15th century witness of the first advent of the gypsies in Scotland, farther the wild black Irishman of Queen Elizabeth's reign, with his plaited hair, his swarthy skin, and his fen land haunts, was virtually a gypsy, and his island was the mother country of the Scots. The speech of the Scots of Galloway was the Sermo Pictorum. The Moors were Picts. The gypsies, whether as Moors or as gypsies, both in parentheses, were Picts. They were Picts, really. By all these names, substantially the same people are intended. By all these names, substantially the same people are intended. Same book, a description of the western islands of Scotland and the Isle of Gigay. So the inhabitants are all Protestants. Because a lot of the times they'll be like, oh, we had a shipload of Protestants come from Ireland or whatever. And we're just, oh, a bunch of white people, right? That's what we're all assuming. And that's what I'm trying to help break that spell. The inhabitants are all Protestants and speak the Irish tongue generally, there being but a few that speak English. They are grave and reserved in their conversation. They are accustomed not to bury on Friday. They are fair or brown in complexion and use the same diet that is made use of the adjacent continent isles. All right. It says about a league further of the south. All right, so this is about the island of Judah. It almost sounds like the island of Judah. Just replace the R with a D. Judah. Says the natives here are very well proportioned, being generally black of complexion and free from bodily imperfections. They speak the Irish language and wear the plaid bonnet as other islanders. All right, the plaid. And it says here the races of Europe, a sociological study. Lowell Institute lectures by William C. Ripley, PhD, Assistant Professor of Sociology, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that's MIT. Lecturer on Anthropology at Columbia University in the city of New York. All right. We are strengthened in this assumption that the earliest Europeans were not only long-headed but also dark-complexioned. By various points in our inquiry thus far, we have proved the prehistoric antiquity of the living Cro-Magnon type in southwestern France, and we saw that among these peasants, the prevalence of black hair and eyes is very striking. In comparing types in the British Isles, we saw that everything tended to show that the brunette populations of Wales, Ireland, and Scotland constituted the most primitive stratum of population in Britain. Furthermore, in that curious spot in Garfagnana, where a survival of the ancient Ligurian population of northern Italy is indicated, there are also other people characteristically dark. Judged therefore either in light of general principles or of local details, it would seem as if this earliest race of Europe must have been very dark. It was Mediterranean in its pigmental affinities and not Scandinavian. A new phase of the matter was presented by Broca's celebrated researches concerning the physical characteristics of the French people in the decade following 1860, especially those among the peasants in Brittany. Here were the only Celtic-speaking people on the continent, and they were of a brunette and short race. Then in 1865 came the monumental work of Davis and Terman, the Crania Britannia, with added proof that a large part of the Celtic-speaking population of the British Isles, particularly the Welsh, were equally short and of a dark complexion. Short and dark. All right, it says the three main physical types in Scotland are well represented by our portraits at page 324. The upper pair, raw-boned and red-headed, is familiar enough, as also the equally tall, heavily built but dark type illustrated in our Moray and Inverness subjects. The middle pair, the little dark man, are representative of probably the oldest element of all in Scotland. All right, who? The little dark man in Scotland. All right, I know, and this was in Ireland too. This corresponds closely to Silures of Wales or the small dark firtbolgs west of Shannon in Ireland. The curly hair shown in both our examples is, I am informed by Dr. Beto, very common among men of this type. All right, so curly little dark men. Ancient and modern Britons. Between the Druids of the 1st century who prognosticated by the aid of the planets on the understanding that she was to receive payment for her divination, and the Druids of the present day who foretells by the same aids and on like basis there is great distance of time, but a racial connection is quite visible between them. The former were of the swarthy, curled-haired and painted race that is known as Silurian. The latter belonged to swarthy Sedevant, painted people, one division of which is described as curly-haired. And although the space that intervenes between these is very great, it can no doubt be filled up. The Druids of North British kinglets, who figured in the Columban episodes, belonged to the 6th century. And to corroborate Pliny, not only have we, one or many, British tribes of the 18th and 19th centuries persisted in their own tradition that they were a tribe of Ethiopians, and such people were in law Egyptians, but we have the same tradition asserted at a far earlier period by those British clans who derived their descent from the Gadelas, an Egyptian chief, and from Scota, the daughter of Pharaoh, Scotia, the daughter of Pharaoh. They got their descent, these Gadelans, these British clans, Scotia, the daughter of Pharaoh, from which names those tribes were then known as Gaels and Scots, the Scots, daughters of Pharaoh, from Tamari. The island which was earliest British home of those alleged descendants of Pharaoh was Ireland. Like I was just saying, these alleged descendants of Pharaoh in Ireland, and that island was once full of a race that possessed many Egyptian qualities, even in recent times. The historical names for these people, so far as concerns the British Islands, have been assumed to be these: the painted Moors of Antiquarian Britain, known by such names as Silurians, and spoken as of Druids, magicians, whose customs caused the nickname of blue skin. Blue skin, very important, blue skin, all these blue deities in blue skin, Smurfs, Papa Smurf, blue skin, they're representing what? Moors, or people of very dark complexion, or green men. The green man is also a dark man, to be applied to them by Caesar. Also the Scots of ancient Scotia, or Ireland, who seem to have left the island for Great Britain at various periods, beginning so early as the 4th century. You know, here it says megaliths, the black builders of Stonehenge, by Elmer von Fleischer. The Firtborgs, Tuatha Danann, the Nemedians, etc. In Irish mythology were pygmies. The first inhabitants of Greenland in the Arctic Circle were the Twa. They are mentioned in Viking sagas such as the Gralendinga saga and the Eldrick saga. Eric the Red found the Twa when he arrived in Greenland. They also inhabited northern Canada and parts of the Newfoundland and Massachusetts. The Norsemen called them Skrellings. All the early commentators described them as being black and of short stature.
So I'm going to read from this book, read from it before in my indentured servitude videos. It says here, Colonist in Bondage, White Servitude and Convict Labor in America, 1607 to 1776 by Ahmed Emerson Smith. Now again, dodge the hijack. When you hear white, don't assume pale skin. Go to page 162 of this book. It says here, Irish. In considering the transportation of English and Scots, it has been convenient and natural to separate the shipment of political and military prisoners from the regular dealings in rogues, vagabonds, and felons. A clear distinction was drawn at the time, and the two processes rested on different legal and social bases. But when we come to Ireland, though the same distinctions existed, we soon find that it would be practically impossible and certainly unprofitable to disentangle political from non-political transportation. By far the largest number of Irish who were transported to the plantations were taken up as rogues and vagabonds under the provisions of 39 Elizabeth. But the reasons that there were so many candidates available was clearly political reason, and the wretched condition of the island was due to the harassing of the English Puritans. Since the rebellion of 1641, affairs had grown steadily worse. Cromwell conquered a part of the island in 1651, and his government sought to remove the entire native population to the western counties of Connaught and Clare, and to replace them in the east with Protestant Irish and with English soldiers to whom land grants would be given. I listened to this. They were doing this in Ireland before they started doing this in America. Moving their local indigenous people, huh? Such a policy, of course, produced an appalling social disorganization, and the emigration or transportation of the Irish was but one phase of the total situation. It would clarify the subject, nevertheless, if the several different aspects of Irish transportation be first outlined. Before proceeding to a more detailed account, the vast majority of people who left their country during these years went not to the colonies but to Spain or Flanders, it being customary to enroll large numbers of Irishmen in troops and take them abroad into the service of the King of Spain. A few of these rebels were diverted to the plantations, and in 1654 it was intended to send the troops of 400 thus to labor in the sugar fields, Irish. There were also a small and miscellaneous collection of felons, a person who failed to transport into Connaught, and of Catholic priests and teachers who were shipped to the colonies, while an unfulfilled project for people in Jamaica with 1,000 Irish girls, an unfulfilled project, huh? And 1,000 boys, which has enjoyed much celebrity, must also be examined. But as has just been said, most Irish who were transported to the colonies were taken up as vagrants by virtue of the Elizabethan statute, and it was the abuse of this authority, not by the English government at Westminster, but by the merchants, all right, the Sephardic Jews and Moors, and ship captains, as well as the magistrates who administered it in Ireland, that led to the well-known horrors of the Irish slave trade. From the earliest years, Ireland had been a fair field for the recruiting of indentured servants. The adventures of Thomas Anthony and the ship Abraham have illustrated the methods and extent of this trade, and shown that it was none too scrupulous. A proclamation of the year 1625 urged the banishing overseas of dangerous rogues. Kidnapping was common. In April 1649, the Council of State ordered that some of 170 Irish taken in prisoners in a Dutch ship be transported, and Cromwell is reputed to have sent prisoners captured at Drogheda to Barbados. The wholesale removal of Irish began soon after this campaign and continued nearly to the time of the Restoration. In the latter part of 1651, numbers of Irish soldiers and fighters sought permission to submit upon conditions of receiving license to go to Spain at the expense of the Spanish monarchy. A certain Don Francisco Faisot had been employed in the country since 1644 as an agent of the Spanish government to raise troops. His services now proved useful, and the English authorities granted licenses for the emigration of many thousands of Irish in organized detachments. By January 1653, nearly 13,000 men had thus gone into Spanish service, and when the king was behindhand in paying for their transportation, Cromwell himself reimbursed the unfortunate ship owners, for he was glad to be rid of his enemies. Sir William Petty estimated in 1691 that 40,000 persons, of whom 34,000 were men, were transported from Ireland between 1651 and 1654. This figure has been generally accepted, and as it was not until 1654 that the numbers going to the colonies began to be considerable, it may be seen that the emigration to Spain was of remarkable dimensions. Transportation to the colonies began on July 9, 1652, when it was decided to write to the governor of Waterford to deliver such prisoners as he had in charge of Robert Can, Robert Jade, and Thomas Speed, merchants of Bristol. Again, the merchants of Bristol. Bristol was a major slave port, whose ships were trading to the West Indies and who would take the lot as they had accommodation. In the next month, a license was given to Henry Hazard and Robert Emmons, also of Bristol, to carry 200 Irishmen from any port in Ireland to the Caribbean islands, as slaves, right? And on the same day, Robert Llewellyn of London was given 300 men. Thomas Speed is again mentioned in October as the recipient of 200 Irish rebels to be delivered to him by the commissioners. Again, here is your slave ships, ladies and gentlemen, along with all the other ones we've gone over. These are, however, the only records of the transportation of military prisoners to the plantations. Though a somewhat similar scheme was suggested in 1654, it may therefore be presumed that the number of such prisoners taken from Ireland to the colonies could not have exceeded 1,000, which is probably less than the number of Scots shipped. In May 1653, the commissioners appointed as overseers of the poor in various districts were ordered to deliver to Joseph Lawrence or his agents such vagrants and idle persons as were adjudged by any two of them to be incorrigible. In other words, the Act of Elizabeth was put into operation, and a proclamation of May 23rd expressly declared that all laws in force in England for the correction and punishment of rogues and idle people were to be enforced in Ireland. This order was amplified, and the seeds of trouble were sown, when on July 1st the overseers of the poor and every precinct were authorized to treat with merchants for transporting vagrants to America. The overseers were especially enjoined to ship only those persons begging and wandering in the country who came strictly under the act, but later events show that they did not observe this instruction. It is impossible to say how many shiploads of unhappy Irish were dispatched to America by the sole negotiation of the commissioners of precincts. No mention of such shipments would be likely to appear in the state papers, and no record of them is likely to be discovered elsewhere. They must have been very considerable in number, or again, Irish slaves sent to the colonies, plantations, very considerable. It is only in those cases of a merchant or captain who petitioned the government for special license to transport such vagrants that any information remains. So they're literally telling you a lot of these people didn't report it. In September, Mr. David Selleck of Boston in New England asked the Council of State for a license to transport 400 Irish children. And after a consultation with Edward Winslow, the council granted the request. 2 ships, the Good Fellow of Boston, George Daly, Master, and the Providence of London, were designed for Mr. Selleck's project, and on October 28, they received permits to sail. Meanwhile, on September 14, Captain John Vernon promised Selleck that upon application to the Irish commissioners, he would be given 250 Irish women between 12 and 45 years old, and 300 men from 12 to 50. Lord Brockhill was authorized to search them out and deliver them, and was particularly cautioned not to send anyone who had any means of his own or friends to support him, thus making his activities come within a broad construction of the Elizabethan statute. The cargo was duly collected and shipped. Listen, they're just going around saying, we need these many women, these many men from these ages. And they're like, okay, we got you. Give us some time. We'll get it. So look, they really got it. It says the cargo was duly collected and shipped. And the reappearance of this matter in Boston several years later may here be noted as a description of the method in which such instructions were followed. All right, Boston, right? Celtics, Boston Celtics. Luck of the Irish, huh? The fighting Irish? Oh, but you thought it was all so-called white people. No, this goes way back. We're talking about 1600s. In June 1661, William Downing and Philip Welch came before the Essex County Court in Massachusetts and refused to serve their master, Samuel Simons, any longer. A bill of sale was produced from George Dell, master of the Good Fellow, who sold Mr. Samuel Simons 2 of the Irish Jews I brought over by order of the state of England for 26 pounds. A certain John King then gave testimony as follows. He, with divers orders, were stolen in Ireland by some of the English soldiers in the night out of their beds, brought to Mr. Dill's ship, where the boat lay ready to receive them, In the way as they went, some others they took with them against their consents and brought them aboard the said ship, where there were divers of their countrymen, weeping and crying because they were stolen from their friends, they all declaring the same. And there they were kept until upon Lord's Day morning, the master set sail and left some of his water and vessel behind for haste, as I understood. All right, you understand this is real history. People crying, people being kidnapped, taken from their families and thrown on ships. And again, most of these are people of color, so-called Negro, Europeans, Irish. Okay? The two men, despite their plea, were judged to serve 2 more years. When such scenes as this were enacted, where the highest authorities were concerned, the performances of local commissioners must have been far more discreditable. There was in fact a period of licensed kidnapping on a large scale, with the magistrates and officers of the law actively conniving at it under some pretense of statutory sanction. Meanwhile, many other warrants were granted to Sir John Clotworthy on April 1st, 1653, for the transportation of 500 natural Irishmen to America, to Richard Nettaway of Bristol on the September 24th, for 100 Irish Tories to Virginia in the ships Golden Horse and Amity, to some merchants of the city of Bristol, for 400 Irish Tories to the Caribbean islands in January 1654, and on January 20th, a sweeping order for the governors of Carlow, Kilkenny, Cromwell, Wexford, Ross, and Waterford to deliver all vagrants to Captain Thomas Morgan, Dudley North, and John Johnson for transportation to the West Indies. All right, listen, you want to find slave ships? Here you go. Just keep adding it to the records and the notes and all the other so-called slave ships we have found already in previous videos. The numbers do add up, okay? Again, it was directed that no person should be apprehended under that order who was a member of any family and for whose good behavior the master of the family would answer. The vagrants of Limerick and Cork were ordered for Captain John Norris in April 1654. 60 women from Connaught were granted to Colonel Stubbers for the West Indies in June, and all persons in the jails of Cromwell, Waterford, Wexford, Kilkenny, and Carlow were entrusted to John Milam, merchant, the merchant. But now the abuses of this trade in vagabonds were beginning to attract public notice. On December 22nd, 1654, the commissioners general were ordered to send some trusty men on board a ship bound for Barbados to ascertain what persons were kept on the ship under color of the declaration for transporting vagrants, to see whether the ship's officers had any warrants under the hands of 2 justices of the peace, and in short, to find out if the procedure had been by legal or illegal means. At the same time, all other vessels were ordered detained until they could be similarly investigated. During the next 2 years, the trade continued. An occasional ship was searched and persons removed, but no more licenses for transporting vagrants were granted by the council, and the arrangements must have been almost entirely in the hands of local magistrates. Complaints continued to come in, and finally on March 4th, 1656-57, the Council of State revoked all orders for the transportation of such individuals and directed that henceforth they should be brought to justice in other ways. The language of this decree shows perfectly that shipmasters had used all their familiar methods of kidnapping trade under pretense of collecting rogues and vagabonds. All right, so literally they were supposed to be grabbing these homeless people, drunks, and people just wandering the streets that had no families, to get rid of them, enslave them, and send them to the plantations, right? Use them, make some money out of them. But they were actually abusing that and just kidnapping anybody they wanted and just saying they were vagabonds, and that was not true. They employed persons to delude and deceive poor people by false pretenses, either by getting them aboard the ships or in other by places into their power and forcing them away, the persons so employed having so much apiece for all they so delude. Likewise, for the money's sake, they have enticed and forced women from their children and husbands and children from their parents who maintained them at school, and they practice such dealings not only upon the enemy Irish, but even upon English residing in the island. For these reasons, the trade in vagrants was abolished, and no further licenses were granted, or arrangements made by the local officials. It is well to emphasize that the principal injustices connected with the transportation of Irish to the plantations arose not from the direct action of the government, but from the wholesale abuse of licenses granted under the provisions of 39 Elizabethan. Such abuses, if not effectively hindered by the Puritans, were at least no part of their expressed intentions, and indeed they made some effort to ensure that no persons except genuine vagrants should be carried away. We now return to the year 1654, when one Peter Bath, who had been sentenced to death for refusing to transplant into Connaught, had his sentence changed into banishment to Barbados. There are only 2 more notices of the transportation of persons under this particular condemnation, and it is extremely unlikely that more than 150 were thus sent away. Most famous of all projects of Irish transportation was that for collecting 1,000 young girls and shipping them to Jamaica, where they would breed up a population for that newly acquired possession. All right? Did you guys hear that? You're talking about they were breeding African women to breed slaves, to breed African slaves. Where'd you get those stories from? What records? What sources? Who exactly? What Africans? Because they were actually doing this with Irish women. Listen, most famous of all projects of Irish transportation was that of collecting 1,000 young girls and shipping them to Jamaica, where they would breed up a population for that newly acquired possession. Diatribes have been written on this subject and pictures painted, and it has become one of the stock incidents with which to illustrate the brutality of Puritanism. There is not, however, very much substance to the whole story, though the letter of Henry Cromwell to Thurlow on the subject makes painful reading. All right, so they say it can't be. You know why? Because these are supposed to be white people. So they're like, if it was white women, there would be more white babies. But look, all you see is so-called Negroes. But it is a real thing. They did it. There's a letter concerning the young women. Although we must use force in taking them up, yet it being so much for their own good, and likely to be of so great advantage to the public, it is not in the least doubted that you may have such number of them as you shall think fit to make use upon this account. All right, that's Henry Cromwell letting you know, hey, go ahead and do that. Take them. This was on September 11, 1655. On the 18th, he recommended that 1,500 or 2,000 boys of 12 or 14 years be sent also. All right, also on the grounds that Ireland could well spare them. And who knows but that it may be a means to make them Englishmen, I mean rather Christians. Or on October 3rd, the Council of State duly voted in favor of shipping 1,000 girls and 1,000 boys of 14 or under, the allowance for each limited to 20 shillings. Then the business dragged along through the month of October, Henry Cromwell assuring Thurlow that the girls could be ready at any time. Ships would call for them. All right, the girls are going to be ready. Just let me know when. All right, we'll get the girls. Don't worry. You see, they were doing this. Finally, about the 1st of November, Thurlow told Henry that the next ships would be equipped to take the girls and that they should be ready to depart about the end of December. That is the last record which exists concerning the matter. It is impossible to believe that a dozen girls were ever sent to Jamaica without leaving a shred of evidence. Oh, you see what they're saying? Oh, they hid that. They were talking about it for so many months that they didn't do it. Yeah, they did it. Because we already got this on another video. We got another source actually stating, confirming that they did bring the girls over there. We got this already. The scheme, considering the state of Jamaica at that time, was fully as foolish as it was cruel. We may well believe that when fuller information came in concerning Jamaica, the shipping of boys and girls was abandoned in favor of the shipping of men. Henry Cromwell declared in September 1655 that many of the soldiers of the Puritan army in Ireland could be used in colonization. Now that their fighting was practically finished, accordingly he delayed the dispersal of his disbanded army until he should have fuller knowledge of the number of required in Jamaica, and the terms on which they could be sent. Not until the summer of 1656 did the project really get underway, when Martin Noll undertook the transportation of 1,200 men from Carrickfergus at £5 apiece, and then the ships went through so many misfortunes that the number arriving in Jamaica was scanty. Few things were dearer to the hearts of the Cromwells than the development of the island, which they had so recently conquered, and there is scarcely any aspect of colonial history during these years of which so much thought was expended and so many plans drawn up as the peopling of Jamaica. The peopling of Jamaica. 90% of these schemes came to nothing. Last of all classes of Irish transported to the colonies were those clearly sent away because of their religion. On July 22nd, 1654, it was ordered that all priests in Dublin should be transported into Spain, but this was altered in the following January so as to condemn all those in Dublin not found guilty of murder to Barbados. In the month of October, a murder in the townland of Lacan caused the entire population of some 37 to be sentenced to transportation, and with them at least 2 priests were ordered shipped to the plantations. 3 popish priests were delivered to Mr. John Norris for shipment to Barbados in December 1655, and the governor of the islands was particularly instructed to see that they were so employed that the return to Ireland should be impossible. 26 priests and Catholic schoolmasters were gathered in Carrickfergus in the summer of 1656, and it is highly probable that some of them went on the Jamaica ships that year, but no further evidence of their transportation to the colonies can be found. The ominous instruction of the governor of Barbados concerning the employment of priests so that they should not return has given rise to the dire suspicions and to charges that they were condemned to perpetual slavery. This was not so, and while the English government would doubtless have been glad to hear their deaths, there was never any such thing as perpetual slavery for any white man in the English colony. In Bermuda, the arrival of 17 servants, probably Irish, were recorded on July 17, 1657, and in November of the same year, an order was passed that the Irish should straggle not night or day, as too common with them. Further purchases of Irish servants were absolutely forbidden to any inhabitant in Bermuda. Nevertheless, in 1661, it became necessary to take measures for suppressing threatened insurrection of Irish and Negroes. Irish and Negroes working together, right? Likewise, the Irish became so turbulent in Barbados that a long order of council was necessary on September 12, 1657, disarming and restraining the wanderings of all Irish and Catholics. You couldn't walk around if you were Irish. About the year 1666, the Reverend John Gray set upon a mission to the Roman Catholics in the British West Indies. His report is detailed, and the figures he gives are perhaps fairly accurate, though they apply, of course, to the whole Irish population and not merely to those transported during the Puritan troubles. Father Grace computed that there were 12,000 Catholics in the Eastern Islands. Barbados, out of a total of 40,000 souls, had 8,000 Irish Catholics who were destitute of all spiritual ministrations. About 400 were in St. Christopher, and Montserrat was entirely settled by 2,000 Irish. Again, Montserrat, which you're gonna see the video, like the video. Again, Montserrat, we've shown this before. All right, the history of the Irish in Montserrat, and you see them today. They're colored folks, and they're proud of their heritage. Again, Montserrat was entirely settled by 2,000 Irish, a figure which certainly seems too large. It seems too large, huh? 600 were to be found in Nevis, while many others were scattered through the small islands, and some had fled to the French. Many other testimonies concur in regard to the Irish and Scots in Barbados. Governor Cyril wrote in 1655 to point out the danger of receiving so many disaffected persons, particularly those of importance, and other writers attribute the royalist outbreak which occurred there to the influence of these exiles rather than of the older inhabitants. A letter of one of Thomas Povey's correspondents indicates that Barbados expected some favors because she had taken above 12,000 such persons. Listen, 12,000 Irish, and rendered them useful instead of menace to the Commonwealth. This is almost certainly an exaggeration, yet it must be remembered that many royalists in Barbados were not transported persons but voluntary immigrants. The most detailed and diverting evidence respecting the Irish in the Leeward Islands is to be found in various accounts of Catholic missions to those parts. There is, for instance, the extraordinary interesting story of Father John Stritch, who founded a chapel in the French section of St. Christopher about 1650 and ministered to many Irish from the English part of the island. After 3 months' labor, the good father went to Montserrat, where he disguised himself as a timber merchant and conducted secret worship in the woods. Upon returning to St. Christopher, he found that English had forbidden their servants to go into French quarter. Nevertheless, many of the devout came secretly, even at the risk of great hardships. The English eventually took 125 of the most zealous Catholics and immured them upon the desert islands of the Crabs, leaving them there to perish. Some of them managed to put to sea and were driven far and wide by a storm, passing many days without food or water. They were sorely tempted to save themselves by the sin of cannibalism, but piety asserted itself, and no sooner had they resolved upon the alternative of death than a large fish appeared, which obligingly allowed itself to be caught by their unassisted hands and provided them with food until they reached land. According to another version of the same story, 300 Irish were carried in chains to the island, where all but 2 perished. All right? Irish carried in chains to the island. Listen, these 2 in desperation leaped into the sea, where one drowned, but the other, who was truly viribus volunteer, ad continentum matando prevenit, and reported the sad fate of his companions. It is to be feared that these accounts were designed more to fortify faith than to increase knowledge. Generally speaking, the transportation of Irish has been interpreted in a political light, and the process seen as the logical development of Puritan ferocity. This is not wholly just. The devastations of war and rebellion must have produced an exceptionally large number of vagrants and starving people of the same kind that were habitually shipped from England and Scotland. Emigration of servants from Ireland was always great in volume in the 18th and 19th, no less than in the 17th century. And it was due very largely to the unstable economy of that agricultural island. Without any government interference, a large increase would have been expected during the 1650s. To be sure, the Irish refused to be conquered, and vast numbers of them went to Spain under the command of their own officers to live in a more congenial country than their own had become. Of those who stayed behind, however, relatively few were shipped to the colonies by the direct action of the government exercising vengeance on its enemies. The Puritans should not be too harshly blamed. It is nevertheless true that the fundamental cause of the deplorable economic conditions of Ireland in those years was political, and that the saints very largely created the vagabonds whom they ordered to be transported. They did not supervise effectively the magistrates and merchants who collected vagrants. They took little trouble over the difficult distinction between an Irish rebel and an Irish neutral and an Irish rogue. They were glad to be rid of as many as possible, whatever their classification, they didn't matter. Hence, we really do but little violence to historical truth in ourselves, treating rogues, vagabonds, felons, military prisoners, priests, teachers, and maidens, all under the head of political victims. Right. Back at the Irish Times, it says, "Welcome to Sligoville, the story of the Irish in Jamaica." Cromwell sent many Irish to Jamaica in the 1600s. The emigration continued for more than 200 years. All right? So think about that. Thousands and thousands of black Irish being sent to Jamaica for at least 200 years, So where's all the Africans? So if you have all this African labor, why would you continue to send Irish to your plantations for 200 years when that's, you know, you have to pay them, you gotta free them after 7 years, they're indentured and all that? Because in reality, a lot of the black Irish were the ones that they told us in school were supposed to be from Africa. How a lot of these indentured servants, their indenture was for life in these plantations. They didn't have no freedom. A lot of them, that's why a lot of them became maroons and ran away. It says here, King Street in Kingston, Jamaica, circa 1800. Look at that. King Street in Jamaica, Kingston. Welcome to Jamra. In the mid-1990s, I attended a St. Patrick's Day party in Israel where most of us were Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. A man from Jamaica joined our crew. He sang along to the Irish songs and even had his own version of the song. Listen to that. He even had his own version of the song, meaning he had the original version. The wearing of the green. I assumed the Jamaican liked Irish folk music or had spent some time in Ireland. He told me he'd never been to Ireland. However, he identified his heritage as Irish. The Jamaicans let him know, like, hey man, no, I've never been to Ireland, but I'm Irish. Most of us born in Ireland pre-1990 will have attended a Catholic school, sat beside a white Irish child, taken a white boy or girl to our depths, and had little to no interaction with people other than Irish, Catholic, and white. As a blow into the rural town, I was as foreign as it got. At that age, I could tell from certain surnames where their family originated. In my home country, families with surnames Ryans, Dyers, and Ellis can trace their ancestry back 1,000 years. Knowing at least that much, I looked at the Jamaican and noticed the obvious. He didn't look like the Ryans or Dyers I knew, and most notably, he did not look like he'd any Irish heritage. All right, so that's the hijack, because this guy, you know, he's like, oh, he looks African to me. What are you talking about? When the internet became accessible, I researched the Jamaican link and found a few staggering facts. The extent of Irish emigration to the Caribbean and Jamaica was so prolific that a staggering 25% of Jamaican citizens claim Irish ancestry. And those are the ones that know, right? The second largest reported ethnic group in Jamaica after African ancestry. Dodge the hijack. What Africans? Do you see? So we know, based on previous videos and research and all the primary sources of who the Dutch, English, Spanish, Portuguese were enslaving, they weren't bringing Africans. We have already debunked all this. So you got to really think about it. It could be even higher, that percentage. That's what I'm saying. Because this article and all these people are based on this thinking it's white people, white Irish, that came in and mixed with Africans, right? So let's touch the hijack as we read this. The first Irish immigrants to Jamaica arrived more than 200 years previous to my Jamaican friend's 1850 ancestor, right? The black Irish were there 200 years previously. We ain't talking about the 1800s. As it says here, this is from the Gleaner, the Jamaica Gleaner, newspaper established 1834. Sligoville, Jamaica's first free village established to prepare for emancipation, Free, So it says here, James Filippo, an English Baptist minister and anti-slavery activist stationed in Spanish Town, purchased 25 acres of land for 100 and established the first free village in the West Indies. The first free village in the West Indies, the land was subsequently divided into quarter-acre lots, which the freed slaves could purchase for $3 each. All right, so I want to go back to the Irish times again. Let's not forget what we just read. Welcome to Sligoville, the story of the Irish in Jamaica. Irish, who's getting freed? It says the first former slave to purchase land in Sligoville was former Hampstead Estate headman Henry Lunan. What became known as the free village system resulted from this first settlement, and similar villages were established throughout the island, most of them by ministers of religion who supplied land to the ex-slaves who had never owned land before. Now we're going to read, and we already got on part 1, who were the slaves for 200 years. They were sent into the West Indies and Jamaica, right? Let's not forget about the black Irish who were being enslaved and sent, transported by force to the islands of the West Indies. Originally named Highgate, the village was renamed as Sligoville after Howie Brown, Marquis of Sligo and Governor of Jamaica, right? Howie Brown, really. No, we're gonna get a body snatcher, guys. Check this out. Howie Brown, second Marquis of Sligo. This is the painting they got, right? This is the painting they got with his red cheeks. So all I know is that his last name is Brown, right? His last name is Brown. It says Brown, Ireland, England, right? Family. It says the nickname Brown is derived from a nickname of a person with brown hair or a tanned complexion. Tanned complexion, really, swarthy complexion, huh? So it's from the Gaelic origin, the Gaelic form of de brun or le brun, brun, right? Brun, dark dusky, brun, brown, brun, dark dusky. The surname Brown is meaning in origin. It says here, refers to the color of an individual's complexion, refers to the color of an individual's complexion, the color of his hair, or even the color of the garments. But dodge the hijack, we already know. Case of brun, the color brun is defined as a dark red going on black, dark red going on black. Okay, in French, that's from the Dictionary de l'Académie de Français. All right, dark red. So brun is dark red going on black, red man. And brunette, if you have a brunette complexion, of a dark brown color, brun. So Sligoville, first free village in Jamaica, and we already know the Irish were there. Now listen what it says about Sligo. It says Sligo was sent to Jamaica to oversee the transition from the apprenticeship system to full freedom in 1840. From what? Hold up. So what do you mean, Kurimeo? You mean he wasn't freeing African slaves from chattel slavery? No, it clearly says right here, Sligo was sent to Jamaica to oversee the transition from apprenticeship, from the indentures, their apprenticeships system, the encomienda system, to full freedom. Irish American Magazine, established 1985, it says here, Slantyman, the Irish of Jamaica. This is a famous poet right here. He's Irish, the one in the middle. That Irish is Jamaica's second most predominant ethnicity may come as a surprise, especially to those outside the country. It all started in 1655 when the British failed in their efforts to claim Santo Domingo from the Spaniards and took Jamaica as a consolation prize. Of course, the British also had been quite active in Ireland, where between 1641 and 1652, about half the population had been wiped out. Oh, really? They just were wiped out. Famine and plague played roles in this decline. Another lesser-known fact was slavery. As part of his Western design, Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell was expanding his ventures in the Caribbean. As part of his settlement in Ireland, he was tyrannizing many of the natives to enslave Irish natives, and transport them to the West Indies was a fine way to unite both agendas. Elliot O'Donnell's 1915 book, The Irish Abroad, paints a rather vivid scene. Gangs of soldiers invaded Connaught and pouncing on all the women and girls they could find, drove them in gangs to Cork. All right, people being snatched up, just like they told you the Africans were being snatched up, families being taken apart. This was really happening in Ireland. This was Black Irish. I want you guys to really picture this. They told us the wrong places. Now, what's interesting about this is that many Irish of today, we're talking about pale skin Irish, would say that, oh, Jamaicans or Montserrat, or some people Montserrat sound like they're from Cork. They're from Cork, Ireland. Well, there's a reason of that. Look what they're telling you here. They drove them in gangs to Cork. At Cork, the slave catchers began to assess their plunder, among other activities. Back in the Irish Times, says here the Caribbean Irish, the other Emerald Isle. With many islanders claiming Irish ancestry, Montserrat is proud of its green history, even if it defies the notion of the nice Irish slaveholder. Today, however, its focus is on rebuilding after natural disasters. All right, we're gonna get into a video from Montserrat. Just want to show you guys this and just look at it. It's all over the internet. You guys can just research it. It's more than just being part Irish, you know, and the whole African story has to be rethought. There is no real proof of it. There is more proof where these ships were really coming from. Before they were even bringing Europeans, we already know that they were coming here and depleting the local indigenous population first, using them, enslaving them, and then they were getting rid of their undesirables in Europe. So it wasn't really Africans. I hope by now you guys are understanding from all these presentations and everything we're learning that the rabbit hole is much, much deeper. And again, this ain't about hating anybody or hating Africa or going at Pan-Africans. We're just trying to set the record straight. We're trying to correct false narratives. We got to tell the truth. We got to tell the real stories. No matter how you feel about it, no matter if you get all emotional about it. Worshippers wearing the Montserrat national dress of Irish tartan, the national dress of Montserrat. Attend mass in the town of a lookout. Customs officers stamp shamrocks in the passports of visitors to this tiny West Indies island. Okay? That's how deep it is there.
Its Irish heritage in a big way each year around St. Patrick's Day. They call it Green Week, and as our Melissa Noel found out, the festivities are also a commemoration of the island's freedom fighters.
Celebrating St. Patrick's Day is so special here on the island of Montserrat that they don't just do it for 24 hours. They celebrate for an entire week and culminate with a major parade through the streets of Salem.
This St. Patrick's Festival is unique because it highlights the blend of African and Irish heritage that's distinctive to Montserrat.
It brings the people from the diaspora, especially. It brings the younger people who have relocated, those who were born during or little shortly after the volcanic crisis. It brings them back home.
All right, so I just want to say, so where's the Irish part? Like, shouldn't they look more what they would consider mulatto? Like, shouldn't they be more so-called mixed, right? I'm not saying they should be. I'm just saying according to what they tell us always, right? So what we've been reading, right?
Okay, and we need that.
So we got to dodge the hijack big time. We just want to add to what Kurimeo said. You know, again, we might be seeing an actual Armorican, ancient Armorican right here. And she's like, I mean, I'm telling you, they're so into their Irish ancestry in Montserrat. It's not like, oh, we think we're little. No, they're Irish. They call themselves Irish. Now, she said African. What Africans? We saw it was all a bunch of indentured servants, Irish, Scottish, right? That were being sent, right? I showed you the book yesterday, the Bristol Registers, right? From Bristol. I showed there was a black population in Bristol. I showed you they were ending up in Montserrat. A lot of Irish in Montserrat. All right, so let's dodge the hijack. I know we'll fall right back into the spell. And I know she don't know no better, so I'm not trying to disrespect her. I don't know if she's done her genealogy like fully, or if they've told her, no, you guys are half slaves, half African, and they just run with it, because that's what these people, these gatekeepers do. And there's one big gatekeeper, they're going to interview him in this parade. And he's all dressed like Marcus Garvey was with his Freemasonic clothing. And he said, oh, the Irish decided to rebel on St. Patrick's Day. I mean, the slaves decided, so the slaves decided to rebel on St. Patrick's Day, really?
And they're here, we need to just cultivate the culture, let them see it, let them share it, so that it can be carried on.
Amid the shamrock shirts and suits was the sweet sound of steel pan and people dressed in traditional masquerade attire. It's a celebration of all things Irish and Caribbean at the same time. The experience is one that people from all over the world come to Montserrat to be a part of.
I can't imagine spending St. Patrick's Day anywhere else.
We're enjoying the hospitality. Yeah. That's what good about the hospitality. You feel like you're home. Yeah, everything is just really nice.
What's also unique about this festival is why it was started in the first place.
Not so many people know the African side, what happened in that glorious St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 1768.
Oh, not so many people know about that great St. Patrick's Day in 1768. I want you to notice the clothing he has on. If you're African, why you dress only like a Huguenot? Why you dress like a Huguenot? Why you dress like a Huguenot? If you're half African, where's the little African attire? Why don't you represent that a little bit more, huh?
Why is he looking like Marcus Garvey? And like this guy right here on the right, who was a black European. Listen to what he's going to say. He's going to tell you that the slaves rebelled on St. Patrick's Day. Why would they do that on St. Patrick's Day? And we already know, that's the hijack, who the so-called slaves are, right? Indians and indentured servants. American Indians and indentured servants. Stop saying Africans. Stop lying to the people. I don't know if you know, man. I don't know if you know history or you're just a gatekeeper. Maybe I should give him the benefit of the doubt. He don't know. I don't know, but for some reason, I feel like he's on that hijack. I feel like he's on that hijack, Tosh, the hijack. All right?
The African slaves on the island decided that they were going to risk it all and go for freedom. It did not work, but the symbolism of what they did is what the spirit is what we're living today.
All right. So, much love to the brother right there. So he's saying, we're talking about not knowing the history. Can he show me, he's saying African, can he show me and prove to me that these were Africans that did the uprising on St. Patrick's Day? They specifically chose St. Patrick's Day to do the uprising. All right, and he said it didn't work. Dodged the hijack big time, all right? What are we really looking at? Are we really looking at Africans or the so-called black Irish people that are being called African? I'm not saying everybody is, because they told you, right? Irish and Caribbean, or Irish and what? Carib Indian, Arawak.
This is a celebration of freedom and a fusion of cultures that makes for a St. Patrick's experience unlike any other in the world. In Salem, Montserrat, I'm Melissa Noel for One Caribbean TV.
All right, we're going to get another video right here just to correlate again, just get a perspective of what I'm talking about, why it's so much part of their culture in Montserrat.
Most Montserratians have Irish names somewhere in their genealogy.
Danny Sweeney,
Morris Gibbons,
Joseph Sweeney.
My mother reminded me this morning of the pluses that we got from the Irish. And one of them was the ability to throw stones accurately. They can pick up a rock or a bottle and you're in trouble. I'm also told that we learned to make stone walls, accurate cuts in stones and bricks to make walls from the Irish.
On the east side of Montserrat there is a lot of shipwreck. And that's why most of the white people from Ireland was living in the hills.
Montserrat was once a white colony without any black people for 100 years. And then after the slave trade, that also changed. So the Irish, who was indentured servants, who were also classified as slaves, was also, who mingled with the blacks. And that's how I become this color.
Oh my gosh, you became that color?
So the Irish, who was indentured servants, who were also classified as slaves,
and
was also who mingled with the blacks, and that's how I become this color.
Oh, that's how you became that color. All right. So much love to the elder right there, and he told you, hey, Montserrat basically was a white island. That was a white Irish colony. Really, it was more than half, more than 60%. They give you these numbers, but it was most of them are all Irish. And he's saying they mingled with the Africans, right? So they're leaving first of all, they're leaving out the Aborigines, right? The indigenous people, right? They're like completely canceling them out. And then they're telling you, well, they mix with the Africans, right? They have no proof of any of these people being African, right? Either way. Now the other thing is, he's saying that that they mingled and now he's a colored man. But are we looking at some original Irish here?
I'm trying to
All right, so I just want to add to what I was saying that day is he literally said, for 100 years, Montserrat was a white colony. Again, remember, white. They're only saying white because they know it was indentured servants. He said they were indentured servants like slaves. They were treated like slaves. He knows the history, yet he's saying he turned black. Can you hear, like, I'm silly, like, I don't know, like, to me it's so silly, like I don't, the oppression and the way we were so brainwashed and fooled that this person actually believes that he's an actual Irish person that became colored. He didn't say I'm a black man. He said I'm Irish and now I'm this color. You guys understand what he said to you right there? And all I know is Irish. My uncle Willie's Irish. My uncle McClure, he's Irish. My other uncle Gibbons, he's Irish. My other Mackenzie, he's Irish too. We're all Irish. So how did we become? He's like, oh, we became this color. I guess we mixed in with the blacks, with the crayon colors, and we got a crayon color now. That's what he said. He literally said that, man. He literally said that, all right? But at least he's admitting he's Irish. At least we'll give him that.
Trace my family Gibbons in Galloway, in Ireland. I'm hoping someday we'll be able to connect the family from Ireland and the family, the Gibbons in Montserrat, in one. And I promise that if I found the Gibbons in Ireland, I'll share the land that the Gibbons have here so that we could be as one, Ireland and Montserrat.
There's a Montserratian everywhere, from Alaska to Australia, you name it. There's a Montserratian under a rock somewhere. And in the same way, I'm told that the Irish are everywhere, and they all love homecoming. So we have a huge homecoming.
Not just the quilts, but now look at the border clothing. You've seen the Seminole clothing, right? Our native people in Costa Rica dress like this. The only difference is we don't have the Irish colors or the what's it called? The plaited Irish symbols and Scottish symbols, right? We don't have. That's the only difference. So they mix their Irish culture with the native clothing gear. You see what they did? So where's the African culture? This is Irish and Indian indigenous, Irish and indigenous clothing. Look at clothing.
At Christmas, huge homecoming at St. Patrick's. So we have that close connection to our homeland. And that, I think, has come somewhat from the Irish as well.
All right. So now I want to get into, this book. I've actually been holding on to this book for many, many years, believe it or not. I know a lot of people have dropped it here and there and mentioned it. I always wanted to do the Black Irish Connection video. So I've been waiting for the right moment. We had to go over so much things before, so people wouldn't get emotional and think I'm trying to make them Europeans or just Irish. We're talking about self-hate or blackwashing or anything like that. I think we're at the point where we are very informed now as a community. So these things should be looked at less with emotions and more with historical reality and reference. Okay, this is real. Now, the book is called Whence the Black Irish of Jamaica by Joseph J. Williams, S.J., Ph.D. All right, it says here Jamaica Irish in parentheses, literally saying these are Irish, right? It says standing, Collins, Walsh, McKeon, McDermott, kneeling is Burke and McKay. McKay, huh? From Ireland through Barbados to Jamaica, Lincoln McVeigh, the Dow Press, all right? And I got another version here because I don't have that version with that cover. This is the one I got right here. Again, Whence the Black Irish of Jamaica. And right here is showing you a typical of the Black Irish in Jamaica, all right? Take a good look. That's a typical Black Irish, all right, from Jamaica. Joseph Williams is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, fellow of the Royal Geographical and American Geographical Societies, honorary member of the Société Académique Internationale, member of the International Institute of African Languages and Cultures, member of the Catholic Anthropological Conference, member of the American Folklore Society, member of the American Catholic Historical Association. All right, so this guy got a lot of credentials. All right, so it says here in the introduction, visitors to Jamaica and the British West Indies frequently remark a seeming anomaly. and even the remotest sections of the bush, and among the darkest of the Negroes who clearly trace their ancestry back to the early slaves from Africa. No, that's not true, just because they're very dark. All right, just want to remind everybody. All right, we already went over this, right? I'm gonna keep putting early Irish people were black with blue eyes. Early Irish people were black with blue eyes. Okay, so dodge the hijack when they're talking about their Africa stuff. That's conjecture. We already passed all that Pan-African false narratives. They will find distinctively Irish names. No matter literally what he's saying, it doesn't matter how dark they are. You're gonna find Irish names so common that in an unguarded moment, they are apt to give flight to the imagination and claim that they have actually encountered a touch of the brogue. All right. A few years ago in one school in Kingston might be found Burke, Collins, McKay, McDermott, McKeon, and Walsh, and with one exception, the last named, who was a dusky brown, they were to all appearances full-blooded Negroes. In a single classroom of another school, there were Collins, Kennedy, McCormick, and O'Hare. And here again, in only one case did the features or complexion indicate any infusion of Caucasian blood. All right, only one of them was light-skinned, he's saying, or looked a little bit white. Although this one too was as black as the rest, he's still a so-called Negro. Listen to what he's saying. Perhaps one of the names most frequently met with throughout the island is that of Burke. In some few instances, it is true the name itself may be a corruption of that of the Haitian refugees Dubourg, who came to Jamaica in the 18th century at the time of the Haitian uprising. All right, that's a whole other history. We're gonna definitely get into too. I've mentioned it before. The usual explanation given for the presence of Irish names is, of course, that the slaves of former days were generally called by the family name of the master. And that's very false. These are your last names. We've shown the coat of arms. But in the case of Burke, at least, we do not find a single planter of that name among the early records of Jamaica. Boom, major drop right there, all right? Major drop. He's literally telling you, you saw the guy's credentials. He did the research. He said, they tell us that most of these people got their Irish last names because they were slaves of an Irish white master, right? That he baptized them or passed it down to them. But he actually looked into Burke, right? And he found no plantation owners with that name. He didn't find a single planter of that name among the early records of Jamaica. So it's not a slave master name. Certainly the survey of the year 1670 shows that at that time, not 1 acre of land was owned by anyone named Burke. Okay, debunked. And the same may be said in the case of most of other Irish names we encounter today among the Negroes of the island. Okay, you guys listening? Major drop here, major, killing all the Pan-African lies. That's not a white master name. That is your last name from your Irish ancestors, that part of your tree. That's coming from them. It's not a slave master name. Okay, he's telling you right here. This is the case for most Irish names today among the Negroes of the island. Pay attention. The purpose then of the present writer is to find a solution to the riddle. Whence the Black Irish of Jamaica? And the answer, briefly summarized, lends itself to a threefold division from Ireland through Barbados to Jamaica. It says here in chapter 1, from Ireland. Mary Gunn, writing about Jamaica in 1922 in her chapter on the White Bondsman, states, to this boiling pot, Cromwell sent 1,000 Irish men and 1,000 Irish women. I can find nothing but the bare notification that they arrived. So they did make it. You'll get in other writings that they don't know if Cromwell was able to pull this off, if he actually was able to send the 1,000 women and 1,000 boys, but clearly stating here that they did find a record saying they did arrive. And it hardly seems to me those 2,000 Irish can have helped matters much, whether they were poor convicts or political prisoners, right? Again, Black Irish that were coming in. In 1756, Dr. Brown was most emphatic in his statement. Cromwell, having had early intelligence of this conquest, Jamaica, resolved to miss no opportunity of supporting this new acquisition, which now indeed served him as another Siberia. And Edward Long, the historian who was Speaker of the Jamaica House of Assembly in 1768, when writing a few years later, only expressed a commonly accepted opinion in the island when he recorded that the Council of State in England voted that 1,000 girls and as many young men should be lifted in Ireland and sent over to assist in peopling the colony. All right, and there's sources for that. On May 11, 1655, Jamaica formally capitulated to the representatives of Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England, and as early as the following July 18th, we find a document signed by the field officers of the army in Jamaica entitled Several Considerations to be humbly represented to His Highness, the Lord Protector, and Council concerning the army in America, wherein after bespeaking necessary equipment and supplies, the request is made that servants from Scotland or elsewhere may be sent to assist in planting. Planting, who was going to be sent to the plantations? Servants from Scotland, and that included literally a lot of Black Irish. They were living already in Scotland, for which the officers out of their pay will make such allowance as His Highness shall think fit, and assign them such proportions of land as His Highness shall direct the expiration of their respective terms. All right, so as soon as their indenture is up, they get to have land and be their own masters, right? Or plantation owners. There is in the library at Boston College, Newton, Massachusetts, an undated manuscript, presumably in the handwriting of Oliver Cromwell, entitled Certain Queries Concerning His Highness' Interest in the West Indies. The last two paragraphs read as follows: whether His Highness' interest in the West Indies can be carried on without the settling of some course for the constant supplying them with people, whether the weeding the commonwealth of vagabonds, condemned persons, and such are useless and hurtful in war and peace, and a settled course taken for the transporting them to the Indies, and thereby principally supplying Jamaica, is not necessary to be consulted. This was a pretty good read, proving that Irish were sent to Barbados and Jamaica as slaves. He is quoting a lot of primary sources that we, going over. So, it's kind of like the same information, but make sure to read it on your own, get the full history, all the proof that, yeah, they were sending Irish over here and they were being treated literally like the stories they told us in school about the treatment of African slaves. And even though we assume that indentured servitude is not the same, when we read these first-hand accounts, as they state in this book, he literally says that. Even though we say indentured servant is different, when you read the primary sources of what these people were going through and what was happening to them, it's the exact same thing that we hear about was happening to supposedly African slaves. This is a very scholarly source, all right? And he has a lot of primary sources here stating what they were doing to the Irish and how they ended up in Jamaica. All right, so make sure you guys get the book and go ahead and read it all the evidence, all the sources, letting you know how they were bringing thousands and thousands of Irish to the West Indies and to Jamaica and the treatment they were receiving. All right, so dodge the hijack with all the African stuff because they can't prove that. Now I'm at the Society for Irish Latin American Studies, Volume 5, Number 3 from 2007. It says Irish Migration Studies in Latin America. This actually goes over a lot of great content and articles. And we're in this one, Irish Indentured Servants, Papists, Colonists, and Spanish Colonial Puerto Rico, 1650 to 1800. And it says here, the Irish in the Caribbean. Following Oliver Cromwell's conquest of Ireland, Irish military prisoners, religious dissidents, and abductees were shipped out to the British Caribbean plantations as indentured workers. Historian Hilary MacD Beckles described the attitude of the British planters towards their victims. All right, listen to this. This is how they were treated. Remember, most of these are Black Irish. English masters considered their Irish servants as belonging to a backward culture, unfit to contribute anything beyond their labor to colonial development. Furthermore, their adherence to the Catholic religion reinforced the planters' perception of them as opposed to the English Protestant colonizing mission that in fact had begun in Ireland. All right, these English, so-called English Protestants, they're Sephardic and Moorish people, a lot of them. Crypto Jews, crypto Muslims, new conversos, right? Protestants, Huguenots, and all that, right? And of course, they got beef with the Catholics. Doesn't matter about color. They are colored and the Catholics are colored. It's not about complexion. Irish servants then were seen by the English planter class as an enemy within and were treated accordingly. So it wasn't that they was just like farm help and slaves. These were the enemy. So they were often mistreated by a biased judicial system, imprisoned, publicly flogged, and banished for arbitrary or minor offenses, labor, unrest, and other forms of resistance by the Irish, whom some English planters thought a greater threat than their African slaves. What Africans? So the Irish were more threat, for a slave revolt? Were swiftly and brutally suppressed. Many suffered slave-like working and living conditions, which often fueled anti-British plots and rebellions. Rumors of collaborative plots by Irish servants and enslaved Africans are other indigenous people and other black Europeans circulated in the Bahamas in the 1650s and 1660s. So again, who's these enslaved Africans? Most likely indigenous Americans who are people of color and maybe possibly other black Europeans. Right, circulated in the Bahamas in 1650s and 1660s. The Irish rose up violently in St. Kitts in 1666 and in Montserrat in 1667, and later defected to the invading French forces. Over 100 rebelled again in St. Kitts 2 years later. All right, now this is a big one because they tell us that this insurrection, this slave revolt was African slaves that did it on St. Patrick's Day. It's clearly telling us right here, right, scholarly source, the Irish rose up violently, not the African slaves. These were the slaves they were talking about. The person saying, well, yeah, when we were Africans, we rose up on St. Patrick's Day and we rebelled and we gained our freedom. No, it wasn't Africans. It's telling you clearly right here, the Irish rose up violently in St. Kitts in 1666 and in Montserrat in 1667. And later defected to the invading French forces. Over 100 rebelled again in St. Kitts 2 years later. In Antigua and Montserrat, the British conducted mass arrests and deportations of pro-French Irish servants. In 1694, Jamaica's Governor William Beeston suspected that Irish Papists were actively encouraging the French to invade the island. In 1729, the Jamaica Assembly passed an act to prevent dangers that may arise from disguised as well as declared Papists. The measure responded to public statements by Irish servants to the effect that they would not fight the Spaniards in the event that they attacked Jamaica. Right, so 1700s still going on. 100 years later, they're still having problems with the Irish slaves revolting. And to their alleged secret correspondence with the Spaniards in Cuba. Following a pattern established by Amerindians, sea flight as a means to escape servitude became commonplace for both indentured servants and Africans. Who were they copying? The Amerindians. Who? So what does that mean? They were enslaving who? American Indians, right? And what were the black Irish doing? Running away with them. Maroons, right? African captives? No. What Africans? You still haven't proved any African yet. What African ship are you talking about? I know you can prove the Irish ships and the Indian ones. What Africans are you talking about? Remember, they're going to always add the hijack because these people are so-called Negroes. So they got to always try to say that there's Africans somewhere in there. But look what they're telling you. American Indians were being enslaved, and they was the ones helping or showing some of these black Irish indentured servants / slaves how to run away or escape into the sea. Ordinances in St. Christopher or St. Kitts penalized anyone who sailed off with servants without authorization. An abridgment of the Acts of Assembly of St. Christopher 1740, right? That's where it's from. Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba became popular destinations for the fugitives, right? Oh, you didn't know about that, right? All right, so all these fugitives, where did they end up? Some of them ended up in the other islands, Black Irish. The Spaniards often labeled the servants Ingleses, English, but there can be little doubt that most such cases refer to the Irish. All right, a lot of the times we've gotten this before. Many Irish and Scottish and other people, Germans, were being sent to England before they were being sent to the American colony plantations, and they would come in as English, but they were really from other countries, as it's telling you here. In 1657, 2 Dutch and 2 British Catholics who claimed to have been held as slaves by the British in St. Thomas. They were slaves. Who? Dutch and British Catholics. They were the slaves, not Africans. They had fled to Puerto Rico, all right? They ended up in Puerto Rico. So did the 21-year-old Irish servant Joseph Marquis in 1688, who absconded from the British Virgin Islands. 3 more sought shelter in the western seaside town of Aguada in 1700. The anonymous Ingles married to a black female slave who led 36 African maroons. All right, who's these African, so-called African maroons? Dodged a hijack, and 4 Amerindian captives. All right, these are probably other Indians from other parts of America, or again, other black Europeans. And he led them to where? Puerto Rico, to request asylum in 1715, was probably Irish. In 1763, the Irish servant Diego Sky fled to Puerto Rico along with a British companion from Spanish town, Jamaica. At the beginning of the century in 1701, alarmed by the frequency and magnitude of the maritime exodus, listen to this, alarmed with all these Irish runaways, these are not Africans, alarmed with these black Irish runaways, they call it maritime exodus, their freedom, right, their exodus, the Jamaica Assembly passed an act to prevent freemen, white servants, Negroes, and other slaves running away from the islands in shallops, boats, and other vessels, okay? See how they group all those people together? A decade later, Governor Hamilton reported that his counterpart in Santo Domingo sought to inveigle several Irish papists settled in HM colonies, alleging it was for their interest to desert the tyranny these heretic dogs exercised over them. As late as 1768, the authorities in Cuba reported the arrival of Irish escapees from Jamaica. Listen, this is huge. They don't tell us about this history and genealogy in a lot of these places in Cuba and Santo Domingo and Puerto Rico, right? All of a sudden, they just become Africans. Despite the antagonistic climate between England and Spain and the latter's policy of harboring and freeing the Irish servants, Spain exercised strict control over foreign immigrants and a persistent but unrealistic attempt to keep the riches of the Indies from falling in the hands of non-Hispanics. Although the Spanish crown incorporated or collaborated with subjects from various parts of Europe, for example, Austrians, Italians, and French, the laws of the Indies strictly forbade foreigners from settling or trading in Spanish America. However, many non-Iberians slipped past these prohibitions. Some had become Hispanicized prior to or after their arrival in the Americas, keeping track of their whereabouts in such a vast empire, particularly as they moved about within and outside their first points of destination, was next to impossible. Some blended easily into their host societies, right? How can a white Irish with red hair, freckles blend in with Cubans and Sephardic Jews and Moorish Spaniards, right? But listen what it's telling you. These black Irish, what happened? Some of them blended easily into their host societies because they looked just like the other people, stayed out of the way, or built familial and economic ties with subjects of Spain in the Indies, further obstructing their detection, apprehension, and deportation. Since foreigners hailed from diverse social classes and occupational backgrounds, these factors often help determine how they fared in the Spanish American colonies. Researchers who write about them in monolithic terms fail to account for these important differences. To be sure, there were several distinct waves of Irish migrants in the Caribbean. All right, that's a big point I was saying earlier. There's different waves. Yes, there was a lighter skin Irish wave later on, more recently. Irish servants who sought asylum in Puerto Rico often came with little more than their shirts on their backs and gratefully repaid their Spanish hosts in a variety of ways. Now listen to this. Now be real and be honest and logical. When we were in school, right, did they ever tell you about any white Irish escaping chattel slavery from the sugar plantations of Jamaica and ended up in Puerto Rico with little more than their shirts on their backs? No, right? They always told us African slaves or maroons, right? And they always wanted us to assume it was all Africans. I hope you guys are really understanding what they're saying here. And based on the information, all the corroboration that we have seen, that there was black Irish, it's no doubt. There is no doubt. Genetics has proven this. We got to break out of that mentality. And when we hear or read slave or the word Negro, that it means African, because it does not. or that when we hear Irish, that it means white, because it does not. So it says like African maroons. What African maroons? You mean runaway with what Africans? So just like them, the Irish, right? Some willingly provided valuable information about the military conditions of Spain's European rivals. Others joined the local Spanish militia or navy. They also arrived at a time roughly from the 1650s to the 1760s, when Puerto Rico was sparsely populated and in dire need of extra hands for its defense. All right, the Black Irish helped out. During the course of previous research on maritime maroons during this period, I found no evidence that any servant was ever returned to their Danish, Dutch, French, or British masters. All right, so make sure to get all these articles in here, a lot of good info, you know, regarding the Irish diaspora in the Caribbean, you know, things that never get mentioned in certain writings or historical books. Says here, Ole Time Something, a lighthearted peek into Jamaica's past, the Jamaica-Irish connection. And who do we have here? We have Marcus Garvey, right? Famous Jamaicans, Bob Marley, Marcus Garvey, and Claude McKay were all African-Irish descent. That's the hijack with the African, all right? Bob Marley, yeah. Says here, next to persons of African descent, that's the hijack. People of color or Negroes, that's the hijack, all right? We've already debunked that. The largest racial ethnic group in Jamaica are Irish ancestry. So they're just trying to add the African because these are people of color. This is a surprise, as many Jamaicans thought the next largest group to be East Indians. Now listen to this, all right? This part right here is deep. It is believed Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association in August 1914, had Irish ancestry. The Irish Rising of 1916 appeared to have profound impact on and influenced the Jamaican national hero. That's what influenced Marcus Garvey? You mean it wasn't African things? The Rising on Easter in April 1916 is a pivotal event in Irish history. It led to the partition and the cremation of the Independent Republic of Ireland. The rest of the island became Northern Ireland, a colony of Britain, which has had a long struggle for independence from Britain and reunification with the Irish Republic. In Black and Green, the fight for civil rights in Northern Ireland and Black America, Brian Dooley said, Garvey was one of the several Black nationalists who studied and admired the Irish Republican approach. Listen to this. Garvey's Irish influences had begun as early as 1910, when he was Assistant Secretary of the National Club of Jamaica, whose founder S.A.G. Cox had admired the Sinn Féin movement while studying in the early years of the century. Dooley contended that Garvey based many of his Black nationalist ideas on the Irish model. Noted Garvey scholar Robert Hill said as much in the Marcus Garvey and Universal Negro Improvement Association papers. Far more than any other nationalist struggle, the Irish revolutionary struggle assisted in focusing Garvey's political perspective. Hill indicated that even the slogan made famous by Garvey, Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, echoed the oft-repeated Irish slogan, the Irish race at home and abroad. All right, he copied it, he plagiarized it, and he made it into Africa. Listen to this. Yeah, Marcus Garvey is actually Irish. He ain't African. All right, so real quick, want to take the opportunity to invite you guys, if you have not watched my video on Marcus Garvey and his white friends. Marcus Garvey had many white supremacist friends. They had the same values, meaning they all wanted to send colored folks to Africa. And they funded him with his ships. So isn't it funny that he's Irish, actually, and that his values were learned from the Irish struggle, and he turned it into African. All right, so before we go, I want to read this thing right here, a newspaper ad from the Pennsylvania Gazette, November 26, 1747. Now, put everything we've learned into perspective while reading this. Runaway, the 22nd instant, from James Greenfield of Newland Township, Chester County, an Irish servant man named Robert Clinton. All right, Clinton, a weaver by trade. He is of middle stature with black curly hair, swarthy complexion, and about 20 years of age. Had on when he went away a new felt hat, a dark brown coat, a green jacket, right? A green jacket? Huh? A green jacket, just like the Irish dress, flaxen shirt, and fine stock, toe trousers, black stockings, footed with brown worsted, old brass shoes with large brass buckles. He was enticed away by one Sylvester Egan, an Irishman, by trade a weaver, and speaks very broguish, but no servant. Whoever secures said servant and sends word to his master, so as he may have him again, shall have £5 reward and reasonable charges paid by. All right, this is a real historical Runaway ad, clearly showing you that this Irish indentured servant or slave ran away, and he had curly hair and was of dark complexion, swarthy complexion. Now remember, this is in Pennsylvania. They're saying he spoke the brogue, all right? Now, that would sound like patois to somebody. You know, now picture this guy, right? Robert Clinton, he's a Negro from the 1700s, and he speaks broguish, right? Sounds like he has that patois accent. Have you guys ever heard the Gulagishi talk? Some of them got this very heavy patois sounding broguish accent. Just want to give you an example.
You know, our grandmother said, now the buckle children go there. And don't look buckle in the eye. She said, I can't go over there no for play with them buckle them. And the island, they had nothing but plantation. And all they call on the white gold, you know. The cotton and the rice and all the indigo. They strip everything from them. All the children that snatch out the arm, carry the baby this way, the mad that way, the pad that way. And they mean they had no sense of family at all. We have to let our young people know about the struggle.
And I agree 100% with her. We have to let everybody know the struggle. And if these are your people, if you have Irish ancestry, you have to know the struggle they went through. Again, this is a Runaway ad for Black Irish.
Wow, yeah. And that's the end of the presentation for today, guys. I really appreciate everybody that tuned in, people that were here the whole time. If you tuned in late, no worries, just replay it. Thanks once again for all the support, all the new members, any donations. Really appreciate it, guys. We're gonna end it right here. Check out part 28 of the Don't Mention Chase Out series. I'm gonna upload the hour and 30-minute full version there. I got blocked earlier. All right, but thanks for your support, guys. Much love and respect. Actually, let me set up a little, before we go out with Robin Dre beats, you know. Once again, history or myth, you decide. Is this history or myth? You know, I know a lot of people be subliminal. A lot of people pretend to be cool and follow me, and then I notice they come out here and they start disrespecting and talking about go take a DNA test and stuff. You guys are clowns, man. So yeah, man, we already debunked all that, you know, nonsense, man. So you know, we got primary sources and genealogy. No matter what you think, no matter how much feelings are being hurt out there, we're just trying to teach those who want to learn. Those who don't want to learn, you know, you don't have to be disrespectful, and nobody's forcing you to be here. But thanks to all the real people out there. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, we're going out with Robin Dre beats with bite. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.
Robin Dre, beats with bite.